This is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding Bill number 190152, 190153, 190154, and Resolution number 190164. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and resolution.
Bill number 190152, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2020 through 2025 inclusive. Bill number 190153, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2020 capital budget. Bill number 190154, an ordinance adopting operating budget for fiscal year 2020. Resolution number 190164, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2020 through 2024 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2019, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement, authorized by an ordinance of this council approved by the mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the city and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2020, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2020 through fiscal 2025. Today we'll hear testimony from the following city departments: the Mayor's Office of Education, and the Managing Director's Office. And the first person to testify from the administration is
Jim Engler.
Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Council President Clark and members of City Council. My name is James Engler, Chief of Staff to Mayor Kenny, and I am pleased to provide testimony on the Mayor's Office Fiscal Year 2020 operating budget. Joining me today are other members of the Mayor's Office and Mayor's Office of Labor. We have submitted our full testimony, but with your approval, I would like to briefly summarize our work and the changes to our budget for fiscal year 20.
You have my full approval, sir.
Thank you. Don't make the same mistake twice. The Mayor's Office will continue to provide leadership to all departments reporting to the Mayor to maintain focus on the Mayor's priorities of improving educational opportunities and outcomes for all Philadelphia's children, improving economic opportunities for all Philadelphians, developing a diverse workforce that looks like Philadelphia and treating that workforce with respect, improving public safety for all Philadelphians while treating residents with respect and dignity, and operating government efficiently, effectively, and always with integrity. The proposed fiscal year 2020 general fund budget totals $5,983,633, an increase of $455,476 over fiscal year 2019 estimated obligation levels. This increase is primarily due to hiring of additional staff and additional funding needed to continue our study to bring the city into compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. The proposed budget includes $5,263,827 in Class 100, a $445,976 increase over the FY19 adopted budget. The department is requesting 59 budgeted positions in FY20, an increase of 6 over FY19. This funding will allow us to hire additional staff in the Office of Public Engagement, including a Director of Faith-Based Initiatives and Public Engagement Coordinators. It will also allow us to hire additional staff in the Policy and Legislative Affairs Office, as well as retain employees in other departments. We're also requesting $684,965 in Class 200, an increase of $2,500 from FY19. This funding is needed for the ADA study. And $34,841 in Class 300 and 400, a $7,500 increase over FY19. This funding will be used for supplies for all of our units. This concludes my testimony, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your summarized testimony. Just got a couple of quick questions myself. Mr. Engler, in your 5-year plan, they highlight the importance of the intergovernmental cooperation, and your testimony shows 3 lobbying contracts of around $290. Can you tell me what the biggest concerns are regarding state and federal legislation, and how are our relationships in Harrisburg helping the interests of the city of Philadelphia?
Sure. So I think what we've seen this year with the changeover in leadership, specifically in the Philadelphia delegation, we're spending a lot of time working with the new leadership there who are very, very engaged and have a full agenda of things that they like to focus on. So we've been working with them regularly. We have quarterly meetings between them and senior administration staff and the mayor. We're always concerned with budgetary items. That's always the number one thing that occupies the time of both our lobbyists in Harrisburg and end in Washington. And then there's always legislation that comes up, whether it's preemption legislation that happened last year on the beverage tax, whether that's labor preemption, where we like to coordinate with City Council, and we sent a letter up last year about some of the labor preemption stuff, whether that's paid sick leave or wage theft, things that we're concerned about there. So those are ongoing initiatives as well. There was co-sponsorship memos on some of that stuff so far this year, so we continue to be very concerned about that. And then there's proactive things that we want to continue to push, whether that's last year we worked with the delegation on speed cameras for Roosevelt Boulevard. That has obviously been a concern of council, and there's legislation moving to implement those as well. So there's a number of initiatives on basically every level that we're trying to monitor as well as push forward.
Okay, thank you. So I know there's been a lot of discussion about expenditures relating to the sugar tax and beverage tax, or however we want to characterize it these days. And I believe that the Integrity Office oversees and has been looking at the expenditures. Has the administration found any misappropriation or misuse or spending that was not in compliance with the overall goals?
No, in fact, I think, over the first 2 years of the tax, really, we were somewhat stuck in neutral while the litigation was ongoing, so the expenditures were lower than we had hoped. So there were limited expenditures. It was just for, through the Mayor's Office of Education, for community schools and for pre-K. So we go through, regular compliance with all of that spending, whether that's through, the city controller's audit, whether that's through the review of the Integrity Office, or if we ever get a complaint, through the Office of the Inspector General. And as of yet, we have not found any, founded complaint or any issue that I'm aware of.
And the whole issue about money sitting in the general fund, per the controller's concerns that were raised, that's all been cleared?
Yes, the reason it was sitting in the general fund is just that's where the revenue sits. We were holding back on the expenditures. We had been pretty open about that, even with council through the last couple of budget cycles, of holding back on those expenditures while we were in litigation, because we didn't want to be in a situation, if we had lost the litigation, that we would owe taxpayers a bunch of money. We didn't want to go out and spend all that revenue that we raised. So the money was in the general fund because that's where it goes once it comes into the city. And now with the litigation being over and with the tax being finally given the green light by the Supreme Court, we've really been able to ramp up those expenditures. So we were able to expand pre-K by about 250 seats this year, and we have an additional expansion of over 1,000 seats in this budget. We were able to start the borrowing for rebuild, borrowing about $86 million back in the fall. So we're really starting to ramp up these programs now that we're free from that litigation.
Okay. And one last question with respect to a recently released City Council initiative narrowing the gap with respect to poverty and poverty prevention. Can you just briefly tell me what's the city's broader diversity and equity and inclusion plan relating to poverty? Because unfortunately, from a demographic perspective, we see this disparity in the various groups as it relates to poverty and disproportionate wealth and opportunities in the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, so it's definitely something that we're concerned about. We try and view every new program, new initiative through that equity lens to really see how that'll impact the divergence that we have in our society in Philadelphia, the fact that we have a substantial proportion of the population that is below the poverty line. How are we going to focus our programs and our efforts to try and enhance that? We've seen that on things like Rebuild. We did that on our analysis of the program to look at the number of sites and where they were located and how those improvements were going to impact those specific individuals. And we do that for every single new program that we launch. We're working right now on an inclusive growth strategy, working between the Commerce Department and our various departments to really come up with some new initiatives that we think will enhance growth, but also make sure that growth is with equity, and so that everyone in the city has an opportunity to succeed. There's a number of programs in the Narrowing the Gap report that council put together that are either have started within the administration and can expand, right. Or good ideas that we want to try and work with council on to grow and expand, whether that's part of this budget, whether it's stuff that we can do within our existing means. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there that we can partner on to really impact the population that we're trying to impact.
Right. So Actually, Mr. Stitt, should I save those questions for the MDO's office, the reductions in the budget? All right, I might as well give this to you too. So, in reviewing the budget and to some degree the details in the budget, there's been a significant number from our perspective of proposed cuts in the budget from the last fiscal year. And I know we kind of do this dance during the course of the tail end of the budget process where there are cuts that are put in place that seem to be somewhat important to council, and we put them back in, so we don't want to have to do the double count where they're taken out, knowing that we're going to ask for them to get back in, and then people get credit for putting them back in, although people took them out. So would it be best posed to you as the mayor's office or the MDO's office or budget?
I think it's probably just a discussion we have to have maybe with the budget teams to figure out what are those things that are most important to council to make sure they continue to receive the funding levels they received last year. I think we go through a process with the budget. You guys know this, where we go through the budget and try and allocate the resources in the best way we can, with the understanding that there's always going to be some changes that happen towards the end, and we're always happy to engage in that back and forth about what are the key priorities for things that need to be funded and at what levels.
All right, I just don't want to be in a position where we're negotiating with ourselves again.
I understand.
All right, thank you, Ms. England. Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think you know what I'm going to ask about, the Office of Labor. And first, I want to thank the Deputy Mayor. He's been very open to discussing what's going on with that and open to whatever changes and things we can do there. But as you know, on top of paid sick leave, wage theft, now we have Fair Work Week that's in there. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could kind of explain how the office sits now, the staffing, what the plans are maybe as we go forward.
Yep, so Deputy Mayor for Labor, Rich Laser. I had asked Amanda Shimko, who's the new head of that office, to come to the table so she can kind of speak to the adjustments in this year's budget and kind of what her plan is for the office and how we can kind of reboot that office under her leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I'm new to the office, and we have a new two-pronged approach to how we're going to take a look at the current ordinances that we are enforcing right now, but also the Fair Work Week that will be coming our way. And the goal is to look at both education and enforcement of these ordinances. What I've found is that most of our inquiries that come in are from businesses are asking how they can be in compliance with the laws, especially paid sick leave. So we spend a lot of time educating businesses and working with them on how their policies can reflect the law, and they can provide their workers with paid sick leave or with some type of paid leave. So we're going to spend a bunch of time in the office, and with a new position coming on for outreach, doing both outreach to businesses and groups who we believe are fall victim to both paid sick leave violation and wage theft violation. We have some events already on the calendar, 2 events in South Philly in a type of working with cash, it's called, working with immigrant populations who tend to work only in cash and have a hard time keeping track of when they might be victim to these things. And we also have some stuff on the calendar coming up in the fall where we're doing work with CCP and the Scheller Center at Temple to do some small business education around businesses in the city and how they can be in compliance with the paid sick leave and wage theft.
Okay, I appreciate that. I particularly like you talked about outreach, because I think we found early on with paid sick leave, it wasn't that people were trying to avoid the law as much as they didn't understand it.
Yep.
And particularly outreach to the workers so they would know. You know, we lived in this world, it seemed like it went on forever, and we thought everybody knew, but clearly there's a lot that don't. But and one last, as far as the staffing, how many people will you have in that office now?
So we currently have myself and 2 investigators. In this new budget, there'll be a position that's specifically related to outreach and another investigator to be handling the uptick that will come along with the Fair Work Week.
Fair Work Week. Sounds good. So 5 total.
Yes.
Okay, great. Because I think at one time it was 1, right? If I'm
Yes,
right?
we're getting there. We are building up.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, administration.
Good morning.
Will you be speaking and addressing the issues around diversity and inclusion, or no?
So that'll be me as well as some other folks within the administration. Unfortunately, Nolan Atkinson, our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, is out sick. He has the flu.
Okay.
But we will try and answer your questions as best we can, and if not, we're of course happy to follow up and
Very
provide whatever
well.
materials you need.
Okay, and reviewing the documents that you sent to us on page 10, under performance measures, you indicate, and I quote, "The office will also work to make the city a more inclusive place to work by expanding training to additional employees around bias, LGBTQ competency, disability competency, ADA compliance, and also by giving employees a chance to provide feedback through city resource groups." In your submitted budget, you indicate, or your team indicates, that there were 24 department diversity and inclusion trainings in FY19, and you expect to hold 24 again this year. However, the budget does not reflect, let me get this right, 24 in FY19 and 24 in FY20. Yet you say you're going to increase the number of trainings. So can you clarify that for me, because that seems incongruent? You say you're going to increase, yet the number remains the same for FY19 and FY20.
Right, so I think that we're talking about two slightly different things. So the trainings don't just have to be department-based. They can
Okay.
be larger than that, so we may have, more larger trainings than we would just having them be based in departments. We can team up a lot of smaller departments so that we have more people involved in the training itself. The other thing that this talks about is the regular meetings that our diversity and inclusion staff have with department leadership about where they are with their diverse hiring. So we have regular, whether they're monthly, bi-monthly, or quarterly check-ins with departmental leadership to go over kind of how many positions they've had open, specifically on exempt positions, how many exempt positions they've had open, what the results of their recruiting were, how many diverse candidates they had in the pool, what the review panel was, making sure that was diverse, because we've seen uptick in the number of exempt employees we can hire when we have a diverse candidate pool. We have a diverse slate of reviewers of resumes. We have a diverse slate of interviewers. We end up getting diverse candidates that come through to the end of the process and end up hiring diverse candidates.
And with a 20,000 employee workforce, does that happen annually? I mean, are you able to touch that many employees annually, or no?
So we are not as of yet. We don't have a mandatory training yet. We are moving in that direction, specifically around diversity and inclusion. I think you'll see us be moving in that direction over the next several months. Our focus has been to your legislation around sexual harassment training, trying to get everyone through that and learning the lessons of getting every employee through that as we work on additional trainings to come through diversity and inclusion. We want to make sure that we're taking the best practices of what we learn on sexual harassment and transfer that to additional employee trainings that we're going to do.
Okay. And when you say departments, you're talking about, would the library be a department, or what? Because I don't know what you mean when you say departments.
Yeah, so the library is a department. It's slightly different because they have a separate board of trustees. So it's slightly different than, say, the streets department that just has a commissioner appointed by the mayor and by the managing director. So it's slightly different.
So the clock has run for me. Give me the top 3 departments you believe deserve an A plus when it gets to what you just described.
So I think I'll probably have to talk to Nolan to get you some real answers and data. I think the city treasurer's office and the finance department has done a really good job. They're one that come to mind specifically, but I can get a couple other departments. And really our goal is to have regular public access to information around the number of exempt employees and the diversity of those exempt employees on a regular basis, have that be open to the public. We want to put a dashboard up online that people can access, and we're hoping to do that by the end of this fiscal year.
Okay, the clock has run. If not you, I then want to know what departments would get an F in that area, okay? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dow.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning.
Morning.
I had a few specific questions under the mayor's budget. I'm going back to fiscal 2018, comparing it to fiscal 2020. And I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, when we had an increase in the L&I budget, I was told that for every dollar of labor, there's 88 cents in fringe benefits and 33 cents in city overhead, which means for every time we add salary of 50,000, the hit to the budget is about 110,500. And if we hit a salary of 75,000, the hit to the budget's 166. And when we have salaries of 100,000, the real cost to the budget is 221. So what I'd like to understand is why from fiscal 18, the employee compensation class 100 went from 3.5 million roughly to 5.3 million in 2 years, a 50% increase, without including these fringe and city overhead, which is another roughly $2 million or so.
Right, so what you remember from last year, Councilman, is we did transfer a department from the Managing Director's office over to the Mayor's office, the Office of Community Engagement and Volunteer Services. So that moved a significant chunk of that money. We've also seen through the last round of negotiations, there were wage increases that went to all exempt employees. The Mayor's office is all exempt employees. So there were corresponding wage increases that also would have grown the Class 100 budget. I think the largest chunk of that, though, is the transfer that came last year from the Managing Director's office to the Mayor's office.
How much was that transfer?
I don't have it in front of me. I'll have to get back to you with what that number is.
Because in looking at the numbers, it says in 18, it was 3.487. In 19, it was supposed to be 4.6, but we actually spent 200,000 more, became 4.8. And in 20, we're asking for 5.263.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know how much that transfer was, because here's my concern, and it was my concern the last 2 days. It's my belief system that the general fund has increased 21% in 4 years. It's not even a belief, it's a fact. The debt service has increased 33% in 4 years. And if you look back at every mayor probably in the city of Philadelphia, these last 4 years have had the highest increase of spending in the history of the city, $855 million in 4 years. I don't think any other mayor can say they've increased $855 million. And by the way, I'd be totally okay with that if you told me deep poverty was at 8 or 9% or 10% or even 11%. But deep poverty now is 12 to 14. So I'm trying to tie this together. If we're going to make these investments, let's at least see the results.
Sure, and the data you're referencing about deep poverty goes back to 2017, so it doesn't even capture the last 2 years of significant increases, like the investments we've made in the school district. So I think what we're talking about is a data lag as well, where the data is from several years ago, and you're talking about increases in spending that are happening now. And as we talked about on Monday, I think you saw through the last administration where it wasn't for lack of desire to make certain investments. There was literally no money because of the recession. So there wasn't the resources in order to make those investments. And what we've seen over the last several years is a city that's growing. Our job growth has outpaced the national average. So we think it's necessary and proper to make the investments to make Philadelphia the city that we want it to be, to take a stab at that poverty rate that we've talked about so often by investing in things like education, by developing new programs like pre-K and community schools that we think will make a significant dent in that. But the programs are really just starting and ramping up. So to hold us to account to a significant drop in poverty in 2017, when the most significant expansion of that spending has happened in the most recent years, it's not going to happen overnight. We're making long-term investments that we think will bend that trajectory curve to make Philadelphia a better place.
But here's what we're missing. I agree 110% on education. You can have the smartest person in the room. If they don't have a job, what good is it? What are we doing to help those who are 21, 22, 25, and 40 who don't have jobs? What are we doing in their training? It's great to train pre-K. I agree with that. But what are we doing to train the 400,000 people in poverty?
Yeah, and that's why we have an Office of Workforce Development that released their one-year report last week. We can obviously get a copy of that to you, where they've made significant strides on things like apprenticeships, where we're trying to get people into entry-level positions where they can grow into that job and really have a family-sustaining job for the rest of their life. It's why we've worked with the governor so closely to try and expand access at the port, to try and bring in new cranes that are actually being delivered as we speak at the port to expand our access to those types of jobs that we know are family-sustaining jobs for people that may not have a college degree, and why we're trying to work with community college on things like dual enrollment, because we know that that 2- and 4-year degree attainment is so crucial to getting into those tech jobs that are really the jobs of the 21st century. So we're trying to work on it on both aspects.
So I'm going to give you an example. You have 33,000 people in public housing, if I recall. 19,000 are vouchers, 14,000 are actually properties that we supplied them with. You have 100,000 people, I'm told, on a wait list. What are we doing to attack that population, to train them, help them, and get them off the wait list, number one, and get them out of public housing, number two, and get them real jobs so they don't have to be in public housing?
Yeah, and we have done some work with PHA specifically around some of the trade jobs and labor jobs, and we're going to continue to work with that population. It's part of an entire population of folks. It's not just the folks that are in PHA housing. There's plenty of people across the city that need access to this, and we're going to continue to work with them.
But Jim, here's my point. I'm going to use the prisons as the example. We're spending $84,000 per prisoner. We could be spending $5,000 or $10,000 per prisoner to train them, get them great jobs, and get them out of prison even faster, and get them back on track even quicker. We're making investments, but I don't think we're always making the right investments, and that's my point. I'll end on that note. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to go back to Council President Clark's line of questioning relative to our relationships in Harrisburg. I heard you mention that the co-sponsorships have been circulating regarding the potential repeal of the beverage tax and some other legislation. I want to know, have we heard anything about the Sterling Act? The Sterling Act, we know it's been a piece of legislation that co-sponsorship has come out annually, but if there was any legislative tool that could handicap the city of Philadelphia, it would be removing all of the confines and the constructs associated with the Sterling Act as it relates to Philadelphia's ability to collect wage taxes. So can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, so I don't know specifically if we've seen the co-sponsorship memo or specific legislation. There's been a couple different avenues for coming at the Sterling Act. It really goes back to the wage tax and the local enabling tax that the counties have, where they try and either have someone have a credit against the wage tax that they pay us, or require us to send a payment to the municipality that has the local tax in the county. I don't know that we've seen a specific co-sponsorship memo, but it's come up in the last couple cycles. About 2 or 3 years ago, we went to a hearing in Ben Salem that was called by the House Finance Committee, where the finance director provided testimony and talked about how this would have a dramatic negative impact on the city. It hurts our bottom line, and for a lot of these workers that are coming into the city, we wouldn't be able to provide the services that they would expect, whether that's things on police and fire, streets and sanitation, all the things that our residents count on, but also the hundreds of thousands of workers coming from the counties into the city every day. They wouldn't be able to see that same level of services.
Well, we would hope that you would please in real time, and I know we in council, we monitor the legislative action in Harrisburg, and as you mentioned, our delegations in both the House and the Senate are working very hard, and we're proud that they're at the table. But whenever we see a co-sponsorship that would have an impact on the Sterling Act, we should not take it lightly, because the foundation, the fiscal health of the city would be at risk if there was any real movement there.
Yeah.
I want to also hear your response to, I was really pleased to see the creation of a position entitled the Director of Faith-Based Initiatives. And I think if there was any mayor who did this well and understood it, it was Mayor Street. When Councilman Johnson, Councilman Jones, Council President Clark, they have been the leaders in this body relative to enhancing our public safety, restorative justice, reforming criminal justice, and for so long, the past 4 years, and obviously even before that during the previous administration, I kept saying we're leaving this resource on the table that should play an integral role in this city's ability to reduce violence, to support with reentry. So talk to us about the role of that director of faith-based initiatives.
Sure. So the goal is to also to have the director as well as a commission that would help us. What we've seen in a lot of our recent strategies, whether that's through violence prevention, things like the Resilience Project, having validators out there in the community, in the faith-based community, is vitally important, not only to give us feedback, but also to have another resource for individuals to go to and talk to and try and pull them out of, whether it's addiction or whether it's a life of violence, being able to give them another resource that can help them pull them out of it. And we think that having the director in the office will allow us to coordinate a lot of that work, have them involved in the policy aspects, the policy development aspect, and then also help coordinate it with the greater commission. There's a great group that's working now in the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability. We want to kind of build that out, add some additional voices to the table, and really be able to send them out into the community to get that feedback, bring it back to us, as well as sharing that message that the current situation doesn't always have to be that way.
I also want you to note that I really do think that it was essential, because sometimes many of the folks that we are trying to help, when we are not reaching relative to public safety, criminal justice reform, they're not interacting in a very cordial way with law enforcement and or city government, but they do interact with the faith-based community in some way, shape, or form, and even if not them directly, a family member does, who usually is uncomfortable or afraid for one reason or another to interact with government. So I would hope that you all would keep us posted on how we move there. The last question I want to talk with you about is this issue of cultural competency. I brought it up last year with the school district. It is one of grave importance to me. Tell me about any cultural competency goals and or training for the staff and the leadership at community schools.
I'm sorry, at community schools?
At community schools in particular. We, in the 9th District, our community school is the F.S. Edmonds School. We're pleased with the growth. We're pleased with the engagement there, but one of the issues that I've often raised, and usually this comes from leadership, we have a new principal at F.S. Edmonds now. Thank you, Lord. We have a new principal. But cultural competency is important, and I just want you to talk, if you will, for a moment about, how you're attacking that issue.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Otis Hackney, Chief Education Officer, City of Philadelphia, and the Mayor's Office of Education. In terms of the community school staff, we put our staff through the city training that is offered on a regular basis around those things. In terms of, if your question is directed towards the faculty or staff at the school, I think Karen Lynch from the school district can respond to the training that takes place for staff within the school.
So, yes, I'm referring to the staff on the ground, the boots on the ground in the school.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, Karen Lynch from the School District of Philadelphia. We too believe that this is an area that we are particularly interested in, the cultural competency of our staff and the individuals who are engaging with our students. It's extremely important to us that the individuals who are standing in front of our students are reflective, look like, and relate to our students. For this reason, we have implemented a good number of what I would call foundations within our schools so that people are understanding what they bring to the table with regard to implicit bias, with regard to the impact of trauma on a child's life, especially chronic trauma, and particularly how to build relationships. And we're doing that not just with positive behavioral incentives, restoration when children do things, helping them to come back into the community and into the fold. I would say that it is something that is extremely important, as I pointed out, in regard to our hiring practices. We have spoken before about the challenges of finding individuals who are even entering the field of education who look like many of the children that they are serving. But it's extremely important to us when we talk about cultural competency that we find individuals and we reach out and we find new ways to hire people for that purpose.
So my time is up, but I want to just reinforce how important that is, not just for the teachers in the classroom, but the leadership. Because if the leadership has not undergone the appropriate cultural competency training and or the lens through which they view the value of their teams in the school, they won't make the connection or understand the importance of the children in the school. Seeing someone who looks like them, who understands their experience associated with all of the issues that you've just discussed. So when the school district comes, I want you to be prepared to talk about this as a whole, because I think it's extremely important in our city. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman, and I believe pre-K is up next.
Community schools.
In school.
Correct.
Okay, so you guys will be around for any follow-ups. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Keona Sanchez.
Thank you. Good morning. Good
morning.
morning to your first budget process.
Thank you.
You don't even look nervous. So one of the things that we have appreciated here in council over the last few years in particular is how the budget presentation, we've been able to drill down on hiring, executive pay, because a lot of times when we talk about equity and inclusion, those are very loaded words. And I think the reflection in the budgets and the materials has been very helpful, not only for departments, but for all of us to see kind of where we started and where we're moving, right? And we've made some positive directions. One of the areas that I still feel a little that we struggle with is, we started from a premise that we were going to do zero-based budgeting. We're now doing performance-based budgeting. What's your financial philosophy around what your role as a chief of staff to make sure that in that process of this performance goal setting, that we are looking at those efficiencies and the reinvestments? Because unlike Councilman Dom, I'm okay with investing in neighborhoods. I have a neighborhood that needs a lot of support. But what is going to be your role in drilling down? Because that's been an area that is ongoing. And I know some of it has to do with our technology. And, what is the commitment of this administration to say Lotus Notes on steroids is not adequate? How do we come to the 21st century? So what do you see your role over the next year or so in helping us go through those hurdles?
Sure. So I think specifically on technology is where we haven't made investments over the decades. I mean, we're dealing with financial technology that's in a lot of places older than I am, which is just unacceptable. So we're making investments in key programs, whether that's One Philly, which is launching this month, whether that's the changes we're going to make to systems like Famous that will allow us to better track.
What is the timeline for that? Because I've been hearing that Famous discussion. Because, if we really want to get to the core of this, right, we want to compare apples to apples.
Yeah. So I think there was a decision made several years ago to launch the payroll side of that work first, which is the one that we are in now. So that's the One Philly payroll side, and then we'll be building off of that. So that way we're not going out and buying a whole new solution, but we'll be building off of that into our other systems. Another area of investment will be on the tax side. So a lot of the issues we have with, I know there's been a push for online payments, and we allow that, but being able to do it in newer and different and better ways, the way other jurisdictions do it, we'll be replacing our integrated tax system over the next 2 to 5 years. So it'll come in phases. We don't want to go into something where we are doing it, all at one time and it's too big to fail, really, which is what we want to avoid. But I think technology is one of those most significant investments that we talk about regularly. We have a weekly meeting right now on One Philly where we're monitoring progress. We're doing the same thing on other large projects, whether that's the voting machines project, where we're meeting weekly. There's representatives from City Council, from the City Commissioners, as well as the operating departments of the city that are working on that. We found that those regular interactions on a weekly or bi-weekly basis allow us, from a management perspective, to stay up to date on milestones, get a real clear idea of what the plan is, what the milestones are, and what progress we're making towards those milestones. And I think that's where I see kind of my role as a chief of staff for the mayor's office, is to make sure that the operating departments are keeping track, that they are meeting their goals, and if they're not meeting their goals, why? And is it a matter of resources? Is it a matter of staff? Is it a matter of capacity inside the government? Should we be looking outside the government for additional capacity? Trying to answer all of those questions and then hold, whether it's commissioners or cabinet members, accountable to those goals.
So in terms of the, again, going back to kind of this performance-based budgeting where we've not been able to demonstrate, and I'm a real proponent of, if you put a bad bureaucracy in a computer, you're still going to have a bad bureaucracy, right? So what would you say are some of the systems, and I always encourage department heads to really look at their systems, right? So that before we move into technology, we've not been able to see that kind of work in some of the performance-based reporting. Why do you think that hasn't happened, and what are you looking to see differently over the next year? Because even in this year's, the material that we have so far, you don't really see where folks are saying, hey, this is huge, the performance matrix is still not to par for you to be able to say you're having a performance-based budgeting process. So what do you think is going to happen over the next year? Because it's still not there.
Right. So I think there's a couple different things. One, for the program-based budgeting side, we really wanted to drill down, especially in this first round, where we're trying to get every department within the city to be part of this new program, was to really drill down and understand the cost associated with each program, and then be able to manage up from those costs and say why does X cost Y? And I think we're seeing some of that now as we're starting to get to year 2 and to year 3. It's not going to happen overnight. And I think there's other kind of management tools and philosophies that we can use as a government that goes beyond just the budgeting process. I think it's important, and it's important for council to get an understanding of what departments are doing, why they're doing it, why the choices were made to do certain things. And then there's kind of the next level down of management decisions that commissioners, department heads, cabinet members need to hold their departments accountable to. And that's an area of focus that we're going to have over the next year. We've had internal discussions about how we build out that performance management matrix better for the city, whether that's on just a process improvement side. So even I mentioned the other day about the work that the Commerce Department, the Health Department, and L&I are doing around the restaurant pilot. So trying to better design that process, because we do flow charts and there's boxes here or there and there's arrows going every which way, but to better streamline that process improvement across that entire project from a constituent basis. And we've done a lot of work on that system design and service design to better build that out. It's one of the reasons that in the mayor's office budget, we're looking to expand the policy office to include a full-time social scientist, someone that can help us better design programs, look at the data that we're seeing from departments to better design the program, so that way just from a constituent perspective, right? The end user, how are they going to feel about the program that we're designing? I think that was a roundabout way of getting to your answer, that there's a couple layers of metrics. You're seeing one here. There's another layer that goes into the quarterly city manager's report that we send to PICA. And then there's kind of the management level data that we really want to build out as well to help the department heads better manage the flow of information and the flow of resources within their departments.
Right. And I think this is hugely important because, again, when people could say the budget has grown 25%, right? But we forgot that we came out of a recession. There were a lot of really basic core services that weren't being offered. And as we ramp up departments, you hear the mayor talk about potholes and all that other stuff. I think we owe it to folks, and I just want to be able to be more transparent of this is what this has cost, this is where we come from, right? And then there's a service delivery model to it, right? If we're budgeting for 10,000 potholes, but there's 50,000 potholes, right? We need to be able to see that. And I don't know how long it's going to take us to get there, and I think that is going to be the key to be able to debate, the budget and what the numbers should be. Right. And I just feel like we're struggling with that in every single department. And part of it is, the bureaucrats, and I love them dearly, it's like they protect their little pet projects, right? And part of this process was supposed to be, there are no pet projects other than the priorities the mayor has spelled out, right? And so I look forward to working with that a little bit better, because I think if we want to argue to folks that we're making key investments, particularly as we talk about an aggressive plan like narrowing the gap, it's going to require strategic investments. And I don't want to be debating the budget is $5 billion. I want to be debating there's 50,000 potholes. $10,000 in funding is not going to fill them. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning. Just wanted
morning.
to follow up some questions I had from last year's budget process. I know that Mr. Atkinson is not here. He's sick with the flu, but I did have some questions in reference to some of the aspects of his office, especially as it pertains to the Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities. That's been a concern in reference to the funding for that office and that commission. When you look at how Philadelphia, as fifth largest city in the nation, compares to other cities, we are woefully underfunded in that regard. When you see the growing number of people that live in our city and our region that have a learning or physical difference, it doesn't make sense that we're not making this type of investment into this office and these services, especially as more and more people who have a physical learning difference who are getting older, and it's going to have a major impact in our city and our region. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so we recently lost, obviously, the executive director, Charles Horton, recently.
And my question is also, what's the process in reference to filling Mr. Horton's position? Are we doing a national search, regional search, and what's the timeline?
So we posted the position as we do throughout the exempt hiring process. We got, I think, some good candidates through that process. We're in the interview process now. They're reviewing candidates and starting the interview process. I think we want to try and fill the position as quickly as possible because, to your point, it's vital work, and we don't have a huge amount of staff that are working on it. So we want to try and fill that position as quick as possible. I think a lot of the work that we've also been doing kind of in this sphere may not be included within the commission, but is really the work that we've done around our compliance with the ADA. So we did started the study last year, and we will continue it, developing plans to bring the city into compliance, whether that's our physical structures, even our online presence, right? Making sure that our website is accessible to as many people as possible, making sure that the documents that we have on there are accessible and viewable and usable by as many constituents as possible. So I think when it comes to funding, we should obviously have that discussion, and we want to do that with the new executive director when they come on and see, we have obviously, Nolan and his team have their vision for the office, but we also want to make sure we bring in someone that's dynamic and can also help us build out the work of the office to reach as many people as we can.
The reason I'm raising this question, I think we're at a very pivotal time and also key opportunity. The Special Olympics, Pennsylvania has already worked with our national office to make Philadelphia a city of inclusion. Their goal is to make the city of Philadelphia the world's first city of inclusion. I was meeting with representatives from the Eagles on Monday. They're getting ready for the Eagles Autism Challenge and really and their goal is to make Philadelphia an international leader in reference to research, specifically from a perspective of autism. So, and we have a number of institutions. People know Philadelphia is an eds and meds, internationally known perspective for education and medical research, but also we have a number of institutions who've been around decades, just focused on the world in the space of autism and other physical learning differences. And as we get closer to the 250th anniversary of this nation, I think there's a real opportunity to really put Philadelphia on the map to be the world's first city of inclusion, which could benefit us not just for the residents and the people in the region, but also help us from a marketing and branding perspective, much like we did regarding hospitality during the time period of Governor Rendell's administration as mayor. Connected to that, in reference to the Mayor's Office of LGBT Affairs, that's another office that also has had a smaller funding source. I want to get some perspective on that as well.
So did you want, I think, Amber here? If you want Amber to come up and share some of the work that they're doing? Okay.
Good afternoon. So, Councilmember Green, are you interested in the work? Oh, yes, hi. I'm Amber Hikes, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of LGBTQ Affairs for the city.
Yeah, I'm just curious in reference to the funding for your office compared to other cities of comparable size. How does it compare?
As you are aware, we are one of only 4 offices in the entire country. Washington, D.C. has an office of LGBT affairs, as does Santa Clara County, California, and Union County, New Jersey. And so with that in mind, we don't really have comparable cities who are doing this work. In terms of our partner offices, the Philadelphia Office of LGBT Affairs is the most community-engaged office. Those other offices focus mostly on policy, so they do not do the community engagement work or the education work that we do both internally and externally for the city. So we don't really have we don't really have peers in that particular way, but our office is obviously funded through the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and we have a budget that's situated there that includes my salary and the deputy director's salary.
Also, I have just another question in reference to Office of Education, the mayor's office. I think I saw Mr. Hackney around. This is a follow-up question that I had from 2 days ago, and Mr. Engler provided some context in reference to the work the administration is starting to take in having conversations with other jurisdictions at the executive level regarding education, and the fact that the William Penn versus Pennsylvania Department of Education litigation is moving forward and is before the Supreme Court. Hopefully there'll be some type of decision coming this year or early next year. However, I had some conversation and questions about what are we doing to be proactive in reaching out and trying to build coalitions with other school districts around the Commonwealth, especially cities like from a Harrisburg to a Pittsburgh to a Norristown, and do those cities have comparable offices and positions like yours that we can start that conversation in addition to what's been happening on the executive level with the mayor's office?
Once again, Otis Hackney, Mayor's Office of Education. I think with Jim Engler's responses on Monday would be very much the same in terms of us doing outreach between offices in Harrisburg, but also in partnership with the district in those coordinated conversations around that case. We have to be very mindful in terms of Philadelphia, in terms of the roles that we play. And so we're very respectful to the process and eager to, once that case is heard, wait for that decision. In terms of counterparts across the Commonwealth, I am not aware of any in terms of my work that I'm doing across the state. Actually, I have more interactions with other superintendents, as I am part of a cohort of superintendents, even though I'm not a superintendent, across the Commonwealth. There's about 60 of us that I meet with every other month for a couple of days, and we talk about a number of issues. And when it comes to school funding and issues around that, that is something that is shared from those superintendents who are in rural school districts to those right outside Pittsburgh to our end of the state that are aware of the funding issues, and they're just as eager to see some changes to those funding. Even some superintendents acknowledging that are on the winning side of that funding formula currently, they're aware of those issues as well, and would like to see some changes.
Okay. Thank you for your response. Actually, that was what I was looking to hear, that not only are we doing the outreach at the executive level through various mayors around the Commonwealth, but also at the school district level. And the fact that you're part of a coalition of superintendents from around the Commonwealth and meeting regularly is very encouraging, because clearly you're having conversations about this issue, and there's an infrastructure already there in place to help to coalesce and build that coalition, because we're going to need that help regardless of depending on what type of impact that case has. There'll probably be some type of either writ of mandamus or some type of directive to the General Assembly based on how our state constitution is written and compared to other states. And the fact you're having that conversation is encouraging. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kim.
Thank you very much, Council President. Good morning.
Good morning.
So could you, I have a couple of rapid questions, sort of rapid, but can you speak to your strategy for how you plan to engage with Harrisburg through the governor's budget plan? There is concerns, obviously, that we talked about in the 5-year plan about school funding, but also the minimum wage, and whether the city of Philadelphia will weigh in on Harrisburg's responsibility to raise the minimum wage above the shameful federal minimum that it's currently at.
So-
Especially because, Jersey's going to 15.
So we've already started that. We've had discussions with the delegation. We've had discussions with the governor's office. We've done social media and kind of our earned media strategy around improving the minimum wage. We were happy to support Councilwoman Parker's charter amendment or charter question on the minimum wage. We think that'll actually be really helpful and persuasive to make sure that everyone understands the will of the voters of Philadelphia, because we think that's going to pass overwhelmingly. So I think that'll also give us some additional push and impetus to really kind of bring this to the next level in Harrisburg. But it's a huge impact. It would be hugely impactful for a lot of people in poverty in Philadelphia to raise the minimum wage. So we think that's really important. On the other issues around the budget, we have regular meetings, obviously, with our lobbyist weekly. We have done some coordination meetings with our lobbyist, the school district's lobbyist. We do that also with PIDC to try and make sure all of us are working in tandem together. And then, when we go to Harrisburg, we usually go up with one joint set of talking points, so that way everyone has the same message about what we need, why we need it, and why it's so important and crucial that it be funded in this budget. So I think we'll continue that. I think it'll be more enhanced. And as I mentioned on Monday, we are doing it in much more close coordination with the delegation, so that way all of us are completely aligned.
Okay. And you believe the minimum wage will be part of that conversation?
It's certainly a priority for the administration. I think we've said that we wanted to really step up from the city's perspective and say we want to be a leader on this, and that's why we were happy to see the legislation pass in the fall, and we're going to continue that discussion.
Great, thank you. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the Racial Equity Here program, which is cited in your accomplishments. Could you talk about it a little bit more, particularly in terms of the impact of Philadelphia's participation, and especially as it relates to the specific work of municipal departments? And is there a plan to have any reporting on this work that could be publicly shared?
Hi.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. I'm Nefertari Sekoot, Deputy Diversity and Inclusion Officer in the Mayor's Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I think I got the entirety of your question, but would you mind just asking one more time,
Yeah,
please?
I don't know. The mayor's office cited the Racial Equity Here work as one of its accomplishments. So could you just talk to me a little bit about what you see the impact has been, how it exhibits itself across specific municipal departments, and whether you have any reporting on the work that you could publicly share?
Sure.
Or plan to share?
Thank you for the question. So Racial Equity Here is an initiative that started roughly in 2016 with a grant from Living Cities. It was a 2-year grant to teach us how to approach programs and services with an equity lens. And what we did with that grant to get racial equity kind of started to be embedded in city operations was to pick a few discrete projects to apply an equity lens to, because the work is very time consuming in that you really need to disaggregate data by race and by gender to look for disparities in program outcomes or service outcomes and things of that nature. So we did a discrete project with the Department of Licenses and Inspection and Philly 311, where we looked at the city's response time to complaints made by residents calling into 311 for different issues. And what we found was that there was a difference in the time that it took the city to respond to complaints, particularly around housing complaints and abandoned buildings in communities of color. And so we worked with the Department of Licenses and Inspections to make some policy recommendations on how to have more equitable time to serve the community. We also did a project with the health department around tobacco legislation for youth who are being targeted in that area. So after that, those two projects, and I'm getting to your question, we are now working on a workforce project in the civil service sector, where we took three different positions in two departments, the streets department and the water department, to try to figure out why these positions are pretty much filled by people who are not of color, and what are the barriers that are going on within the civil service sector, from the exam, the hiring, the recruitment, and trying to figure out what's happening so that we can have more equity in outcomes. We also just submitted an application, a grant application, to look at how the city imposes fines and fees in a way that its fines and fees may disproportionately burden communities of color. We also are due to submit a grant application next week on equitable procurement practices. So the approach over the past couple of years has been project-driven. The reason it's been project-driven is because it takes a good amount of time to disaggregate data and really look at how a policy or program is impacting communities of color. Going forward, we would like to have a more systemic way and approach to really rolling out a racial equity, gender equity framework across departments. But that takes some capacity. It takes some time, to be able to do that.
Great, thank you. And we'd love to be able to talk with you a little further afterwards about how you see that evolving.
Would love
in
to, thank
particular.
you.
Thank you very much. Two quick questions. Are there any planned increases to the budget of the Mayor's Commission for People with Disabilities? And have we looked at how staffing functions compared to other large cities?
So I think to Councilman Green's question, right now we have a vacancy in the executive director position, so our focus right now is on filling that position, and then building out the vision of that person to match the office's vision for how big. So we don't have any planned increases right now for staff. I think that's something we're going to revisit once the executive director position is filled.
Okay. And then really quickly, can you update us on the possibility of including ASL interpretation in the video feed for the city broadcasting? I think that's one of the questions that some of our community members have asked before.
Okay, I'll have to look into it and get back to you. I don't have an answer today.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Office of Public Engagement, your testimony states that you intend to launch a newsletter that will be sent to over 1,000 contacts monthly. Who's the lucky 1,000?
So I think Agina Amir, our director, is going to come up and answer that question.
Thank you. Who's the targeted audience? Who ends up in that lucky 1,000 number? And how will you share the newsletter for individuals who do not have email access? Meaning, how are we going to, and what are we going to do to ensure that seniors are in the loop?
Yes, good morning, Councilwoman. Thank you so much for the question. I'm sorry? My name is Agina Amir, Director for the Office of Public Engagement. Our universe of emails right now is going to be culled from our various offices in public engagement, the Office of Black Male Engagement, the Office of Engagement for Women, and the Office of Youth Engagement, as well as some contacts from our sister office, so to speak, of Civic Engagement and Volunteer Services, mainly through their Civic Engagement Academies that they've been hosting. We find that this universe is, people want to be engaged, they want to be informed about city activities and the mayor's priorities, and that's something we're excited to roll out within the next couple of months. As far as plans for, I would say, a hard copy version of the newsletter, that's definitely something that we're looking into and, ascertaining how we would distribute that within our capacity.
Okay.
But primarily it will be a digital format.
Repeat the last statement.
I said primarily it will be a digital format in which we'll promote and share also via social media, which a number of seniors or people who don't necessarily have computer access, they definitely have cell phone access, and so that would be a strategy or a tactic that we'd approach.
So respectfully, I would offer a friendly disagreement when it comes to seniors. My staff for the last 19 years have visited senior citizen centers around the city, 8 consecutive weeks, from September through Thanksgiving, and my staff and I wrestle with how we be up to speed with my daughter's generation, but we
Yes.
don't lose and leave out my mother's generation. And so when I travel to those senior citizen centers, they are thrilled to have hard copies of a newsletter that we've been doing for 19 years. And so I would urge the administration to be mindful that there's a sector of our community that cares, that want to be connected, that should be connected, and if left out, exacerbates the poverty that they're enduring because they don't have access to the services that are in city departments across our administration. It's a great thing that we do the Evite and the emails. That's the future. We still have a responsibility to capture and wrap our arms around seniors who want to be informed.
Yes, Councilwoman, you're
Okay.
absolutely right.
That's my soapbox. So back to this issue of diversity in hiring. When there is the discovery that a particular department gets an F when it comes to ensuring that the department looks like Philadelphia at all levels of the ladder, how does the administration reckon with those department heads who simply have not drank the Kool-Aid and understand that one of the mayor's priorities are to have C-suites and executive offices look like Philadelphia. The broken record has started playing again.
Right. So I think what we've done this year is really different, and it's allowed us to expand our work. So we went through a process over the summer, meeting with every department and every cabinet, trying to determine what their workforce planning for the year was going to be, how many openings they would see.
What was the assessment? How was that useful?
So the goal was to be forward-looking and to really look at what we were going to do over this fiscal year, what the plans on hiring were, when those hirings would occur, so we could determine, what are meaningful goals that we can look at specifically around exempt hiring, because exempts are really the one that we can impact directly.
Exempts what? Talk closer in the mic.
Sorry, so
The exempt-
the exempt employees, so people that are not subject to civil service, we think is the best avenue for us to see significant change in the short
Okay.
term.
Okay.
So that was our focus. Some departments obviously have more exempt employees than others. So departments like the mayor's office, for instance, have a lot of exempt employees. The law
Sure.
department has a lot of exempt employees, and there's some departments that have more than others. But we wanted to see how many exempt openings that people expected to have throughout the year, and really from a self-reflection perspective, what do they think what are they going to be able to accomplish? Like,
So
what are their
that's
numbers
an
going to look
intentional
like?
effort. I'm only cutting you off because my time is so short. There's an intentional effort and an intentional strategy to deal with that.
Yes.
Then please help us understand why the library and the administration there have not figured it out.
Yeah.
Help me understand that.
So if I could go back to the previous point, so what we've done is on a quarterly basis review the data for each department to figure out who has met what they said they were going to meet and who hasn't, and then work with them to determine how we, for future openings, how we make sure that the recruitment is there to fill those positions.
Okay.
For departments like the library, I think the library doesn't have a lot of exempts. They have a lot of civil service employees.
Okay.
They have a significantly more seasoned workforce, I would
All
say,
right.
than a lot of departments. A lot of employees with a lot of experience. So I think change there is going to be harder. To Nefertiti's point, we want to start focusing more on departments that are in the civil service system, positions that are in the civil service position.
Okay.
And the office of the chief administrative officer has been directly working with the library on a lot of their positions, because even from the diversity perspective, yes, it's been lacking. Just from the ability to fill positions, it's been lacking as
Hard.
well.
Is it because it's hard? Is it the test? Where's the impediment?
I think it's a number of things. I'll have to get back to you,
Okay.
and I think when the CAO is here and when the library is here, it might be good to ask those questions specifically.
Know that I will. This is a tee up to the library.
Yes.
Since there's a wrestle with, they deserve the funding to make sure our children have a place to go. But is anyone entitled to increased funding when you have a department that looks the way it looks?
Yeah.
Speak to, if you will, the Diversity Advisory Council, which is new, and it says that it's comprised of thought leaders. How were they selected? Who are they? Are you at liberty to say who they are? How often do they meet? Because it becomes a structure with the purpose of helping us wrap our arms around diversity and inclusion, which we still don't have yet.
Right, so we just started, they just had their first meeting, I think, earlier this month or late last month, but Steve can speak to that in more.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Steve Preston, First Deputy Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Like Jim Engler just said, we just put together the Diversity and Inclusion Council. It's made up as 12 leaders around the community in different areas. So we have leaders in tech community, we have leaders in recruiting, we have leaders in the LGBT community. So we tried to make sure that all of our bases were covered. We also have disability community, all of them were represented. The first meeting that we had with them was actually basically we handed them a document that was around 30 pages that was a description of all the work that we've done so far in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, just because we wanted to catch them up to speed.
Sure.
And then we had a 2-hour presentation based on everything we've done so far and what our hopes and dreams are for the next year. And they started to give us a little bit of advice on some of the things we're doing to make sure we're following best practices from the industry. So the first meeting was basically an information download, and the future meetings are going to be where we're going to hone in on one specific project, and they're going to get a download of everything we've done and then give us advice on how we can do things better.
That's encouraging, for sure. My last question, well, we spoke to the trainings, so I'm finished. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Down.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to go back to a few questions. When you're going to check the numbers on the Class 100, on when the increase occurred from MDO into the mayor's budget?
Yeah, we'll get you that. We'll get you those numbers.
And then I just want to give you some observations, and we're all in this together, so I want you to take this constructively, not...
Always.
Okay. So I look out over the terrain, let's just say, and I see that we have of the top 20 cities in the country the highest taxes. We have the highest poverty. We have the lowest entrepreneurship rates. We have the lowest job creation of the top 20 cities. We have the lowest average income. We have the lowest median home price income, like $142,000. San Francisco's 800, but different ballgame. But in that backdrop, a recent survey, I can share this with you if you haven't seen it, from 2011 to 2017, when we surveyed the people who left Philadelphia, 81% did not have children. 19% had children. Those 19 are probably leaving, I'm guessing, because of the schools. But 81% did not. And the reasons why the 81% left, the number one reason was taxes, and the number two reason was job opportunities. And so in that context, I guess my question is, how do we work together to address that and make it so those 81% don't leave and we attract more people?
Yeah. So I think is the Pew report of people that have left the city, is that what you're referring to?
It's either Pew
Data
or
from
one
Pew?
of the entities,
Okay.
yeah.
It's obviously an area of focus. I think from a tax perspective, Pew's also looked at our tax burden in comparison to not just all the other cities, but the surrounding counties. And what we've seen is that over the years, starting in the early 2000s and getting closer to now, that our relative tax burdens have gotten closer because in a lot of the surrounding counties, they've had to increase property taxes to make up for cuts in state education aid, and that's been their investment. They've been investing in education where traditionally, places like Philadelphia have not been able to. I think you would see when you look at other Northeast cities, people leaving those cities for tax reasons, a lot of them are going to the Sun Belt states where taxes are much less, and you're seeing significant growth around jobs. So that's always something that we're going to have to compete against. I think where we've tried to make investments, and we've talked about this back and forth a lot, is to try and make sure that we have a workforce that is educated to meet those jobs. So it doesn't just start in pre-K, it runs all the way through the continuum of education, through community college and beyond. I think it's obviously areas where we still have to work. We're talking about turning around a significantly sized ship of people and giving them new opportunities, but we have to also maintain services at the same time. So it's always the back and forth we have about when we talk about taxes, is maintaining an acceptable level of services, and a lot of times we have to make additional investments to increase our level of services, and that requires money.
Do you have the numbers as to how many people who live in the city commute to suburban jobs every day?
Not in front of me. I know that I've seen the reverse commute numbers are significant.
It's like 35 to 40%. And so I think that's an area where we should focus on in many ways. How do we get those companies that are going to, and we've had a few successes in that area, like Vanguard opening a branch, but look in Boston, Fidelity's in downtown Boston. And why are we not going after Vanguard in a much bigger way and figuring out how to get them into the city? Or actually do a focus on 50 suburban companies and say, how do we get them to bring jobs into our city so we eliminate that reverse commute and get more jobs in the city?
Yeah, we are, and you should definitely bring that up with the Commerce Department. I think our focus the first several years has been trying to get them to open, to have an entree into the city, right? Open a satellite office here with a number of employees,
Right.
and then we would work with them to try and grow that office out. I think that's going to continue to be our focus. We're going to continue to try and poach as many companies from the suburbs as we can, especially as the workforce wants to be in the city. I think that's where we're seeing a shift for a lot of people is the younger workforce wants to be in the city. They don't want to necessarily be in Malvern or somewhere else. A lot of the things that we deal with is that in the C-suite, you have a bunch of individuals that live outside the city and don't want to have that long commute downtown. So we have to both attract those individuals to want to live in the city, providing a high level of service, as well as making sure that the talent base that they have that's in the city also has the level of services they need and then the jobs to match.
But what we have going for us is that younger people and older people are dying to live in the city. They love to live urban, love to live urban. I don't know one young person who says to me, I can't wait to move to Wayne, Pennsylvania, okay? It's not happening. They want to live urban. They want to live urban. So we have that going for us, which I don't think we've had for, quite a long time. So somehow we have to figure out the rest of the piece. But I just want to mention one other thing. I just want to say to you, Jim, I think this is your first budget hearing, but you're doing a good job. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kiana Sanchez.
Thank you. Yeah, we should continue to debate some of I just came from a BizNow presentation on Opportunity Zone. There was 200 people in the room, all eager to use this federal tax benefit. And then obviously their concern is always the city and what we do to facilitate that process. And obviously my role there was to assure them that Philadelphia is open for business and that we're regionally, our location is so good in comparison to Boston, New York, and others, days drive from 75% of the country. I think we've moved in the right direction around some of the business taxes, particularly the reduction of the net profits tax. Tell me what, if any, conversations have been internally as you talk to, and again, you're now the new chief of staff, the net profits tax and its impact. Councilman Dom's talking about recruiting people here. The net profits tax, this need to hide profits has been a long-term impediment, and that's why people went over the city line. Has there been any discussions about looking at all of that? I know we're doing a study on our tax relief programs and some of the benefits and the underutilization, but has there been any philosophical discussions about how do we make sure that Philadelphia-based businesses are not penalized for being located here? I mean, what's your thought around that?
Yeah, so there's always philosophical discussions, especially with our commerce director, because he's so eager to try and drive as many businesses here as possible. So we've had discussions about the BERT. I think our feedback that we get from a lot of businesses is that it's not just the BERT. Sometimes it's the complexity of the process. So, we have a lot of tax credit programs as well that provide some relief, but sometimes they're very complex to do. And, because the revenue department is driven by compliance, as they should be, a lot of times it's very complex in order to even access those programs. That's why we've tried over the last couple of years to move to more grant-based programs, whether that's the Fair Chance Hiring Grant for returning citizens, what we're doing now with the CDC grant, trying to make it easier for organizations to comply with that. I think that's going to be the end result of the tax incentive study, as well as to try and get us to a point where the programs are easier to access. Our tax structure overall is easier to access, and it doesn't just have to be, I think, one tax. I think it can be multiple taxes as long as we're dealing with one form, right? Like if we can align use and occupancy tax and the real estate tax, or use and occupancy and BERT to be more aligned and easier to file and comply with, I think you'll see a lot of businesses be happier with just that. I think people are willing to pay taxes. It's the complexity of the process that drives a lot of the problems.
It's the predictability, and when we started the business tax reform that we didn't finish, we compromised, and that therein lies the $100,000 exemption. One of the things that we found in that discussion is, our net profits tax, we're one of 4 jurisdictions: Detroit, New York, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia. And at a certain point, we have to own the fact that a tax of 6.5% when people are penciling projects, when we're dealing in a global market, is challenging. I think that the administration agreed that the net profits tax was detrimental to Philadelphia-based businesses, and that's why we are pursuing those reductions. I'd like us to spend a little bit of time as we look at the tax release programs, because, use and occupancy reform, having worked on all of those, ultimately, philosophically, we have to take ourselves off that burden that we give Philadelphia-based businesses, right? And I'm a great believer that eliminating the net profits tax is a way there. Small businesses don't have to hide profits. They're not circling the bandwagon when they go to expand and all those things. So I just think we need to pay attention to that a little bit. I want to ask you, again, one of the things is we look at this narrowing the gap and how do we ensure that all neighborhoods are receiving core services. I appreciate the fact that the administration over the last couple of years in particular has made substantial investments in every part of the city, not using just our CDBG kind of sometimes unreliable predictability. How far are we from, the mayor often talks about, Passyunk Avenue. How far are we from making a commitment to every single commercial corridor, like on a baseline? The trash is a big issue. How far do you think we are from saying every commercial corridor, recognized, not recognized, is going to receive some base support, and then let other factors trigger? Public safety, you get a little bit more. Trash index, now that we tell people what their litter index is, you get a little bit more. How far are we from that real equitable, every commercial corridor deserves this, every industrial corridor deserves these core services, right? I know bids and things become popular, and just having a bid discussion, because I know Council President Clark and them are moving it. But, at some point, moving away from 2009, where we took all this money out, at a certain point we say this is what government should be providing across the board for people's tax dollars. How far do you think we are from that?
So I think we're probably still a little bit of ways away from that. I think, we've done some expansion through council legislation expanding the CDC tax credit, which has allowed some more commercial corridors to become involved in that. I think we might need to just tighten up some of the restrictions around that as well to make sure that it's really commercial corridor driven. And that's another area where we're going to invest through the CDC, through the grant program, to allow us to reach more corridors. I think from a service base, we're still trying to recover a lot of our services to the point where, expanding it through and ensuring that the residential base receives the amount of services that they need on things like sanitation, on things like street cleaning, right? As we build that out this spring, I think through the next several years, as the pilot gets larger, I think we'll put more and more of a focus on our commercial corridors as being kind of the drivers of that trash to begin with, right? If it's a duplex, if it's a business putting the trash out. So all of those things will get driven into the decisions that are made about what corridors to focus on as that program gets built out as well. I think it's going to take a little time before we're ready to say, every single commercial corridor is going to receive at least this base level of services. I think in the short term, that the conjunction of CDCs, I think having CDCs work more closely, and I do think bids sometimes do work, right? Like having the assessments on the businesses, it's not always feasible because some businesses don't have the bottom line to be able to sustain that, but for those that do, we should be trying to take advantage of that and then be able to backfill services for the commercial corridors that can't support something like a bid.
Yeah, and I think, again, one of the challenges is that most of our incentives are driven to new businesses. Very few are for the existing, the people who've just been hanging in there, just hanging in there. And I just feel like that is what levels out the playing field for folks to say, who've hung in there, right? The new business gets abatement, the new business gets this, new job creation, the new business gets this. Those folks who've been there, right, it's like we have to level it out. And I feel like doing at least everybody gets this, right? This is the starting point. Is hugely important. And if we don't talk about it and challenge ourselves, even knowing what that costs, right? What does that look like around, multiple trash pickups in commercial areas where we want to encourage residential density, right? It's going to take more trash pickup, right? And having that vision, it's hard to know where we're going if we're not saying core values is this, right? And that goes back to what I was saying earlier around performance measuring for departments, is you don't budget for 10,000 if you have 50,000 potholes. Like, we need to narrow that gap in that discussion, because that really goes to the core of equity. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to go back to Councilwoman Reynolds Brown's line of questioning relative to diversity and inclusion. And Mr. Engler, you mentioned the Diversity and Advisory Committee. I want to ask, because we always talk about the end game relative to our research being data-driven. The one thing we don't always know, and that doesn't always make it into the discussion, is how many people and who were the people who actually expressed an interest in a position. So if you are attempting to measure what diversity and inclusion looks like, and I don't care if you're talking about in government, in corporate, or in the nonprofit sector, it's very important to document, once you post it, who responded and what did the demographic look like. Do we capture that information now?
So we do. It's self-reported, but we do capture it when we post all of our exempt positions on Smart Recruiter, which is the website that we use. We are able to capture that data, and it's something that when we go through the hiring process, we do review to make sure that we have a diverse candidate pool. That's one of the things that we want to drive, in addition to the things that we can control around having a diverse group review the resumes and have a diverse group of individuals be part of the interview panel, so that way we are getting to a likely diverse result. So we are able to capture some of it, but it's self-reported. It's not always 100% accurate.
So I don't know whether or not it is possible or how we get there, and maybe this is something that you all can strongly encourage, that this new Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council that they work on, is how do we incentivize people to tell us who they are, because we never get a real snapshot about the corporation's success rate if we don't have that information. So we can say, well, we haven't done well enough, there aren't enough. But I would like to know how many women, how many African American women, how many Hispanic women, how many Asian women, how many African American men, who were they? And I get that we're self-reporting, but I'm asking that you take back this charge to this committee so that they can even work with our law department to figure out if there is a legal way for us to capture that data, because it will in fact help us in the future. The second thing I wanted to comment on was this issue, and you know, it's one that I've been pretty passionate about, particularly because I've watched the investment. And I know the issues that Councilwoman Marion Tasco went through long before I got here, when I was chugging it along in Harrisburg, relative to this spending on commercial quarters. Much of it during her tenure was driven by the community development block grant spending. And I know a lot of people don't like to talk about it, but the rules, regs, and guidelines associated where you can spend that community development block grant money, our rules are much more stringent than the federal government's rules are. And so we would have, out of the 9th Councilmatic District, only 1 to 2 quarters that could actually participate. So as we figure out how we scale our programs, I ask that you all make sure you take strongly into consideration that for many years, commercial quarters that were in the middle neighborhoods. I can speak for Councilman Jones's district, because he's been a very strong advocate for commercial quarter funding, along with what I know we've experienced in the 9th. We could not get access to any of it, not because we were, 120% above the guidelines. We usually were a nickel over. And so I just ask, in the middle of that discussion, we make sure that there is access and equity across the board, and everything that we do is not just driven simply by what the poverty guidelines are, but we also think about the people who have helped to keep this tax base going before we had all of this growth in other regions, because they have normally gotten left out of the equation.
Yes, we're happy to do that, and I think there'll be additional questions I'm sure that you'll ask through the Commerce Department about the grant program and the guidelines around it, so I would keep that one for that upcoming hearing.
Thank you, Council Lady. Appears to be no additional questions for Mr. Engler. Thank you very much for your testimony. I'm sure before the end of the budget process, we'll ask you to come visit us again. Thank you very much. Next up, I think we have community schools and pre-K. And Mr. Hackney from the Mayor's Office of Education.
Good afternoon, President Clark and members of City Council. I am Otis Hackney, Chief Education Officer. Joining me today are Christine Piven, Deputy Chief Education Officer, and Shante Brown, Interim Director for PHL Pre-K. We are pleased to provide testimony on the Mayor's Office of Education's Fiscal Year 2020 operating budget of $45.4 million. In Fiscal Year 20, the PHL Pre-K program will add over 1,000 new pre-K seats, expanding the program to 3,300 seats in total. As PHL Pre-K expands to serve more children and families, our strategic priorities are improving instruction and center quality, strengthening early childhood education systems, and providing resources for PHL Pre-K providers. Our major proposed investment includes instructional coaching, new curriculum, and assessment resources for PHL Pre-K providers, personalized quality improvement plans for providers, and education classes for teachers. In Fiscal Year 20, MOE will establish 5 new community schools in partnership with the school district. To support student outcomes, each of the 17 community schools will follow a site-specific plan to address those needs within 4 core components: family and community engagement, integrated health services, school climate, and expanded learning time. Within each component, we will leverage city resources and partnerships with other departments. Our proposed key investment for Fiscal Year 20 is the braiding of Philadelphia Department of Human Services out-of-school time resources with Philadelphia Beverage Tax funding to leverage more quality OST opportunities for students in the community schools. We will also partner with the Office of Workforce Development and grow our partnership with the Office of Adult Education and Office of Arts, Culture, and the Creative Economy to promote student outcomes and expand family and community engagement at the schools. Our department's programs have benefited thousands of children and families, and as the programs expand in the coming year, those benefits will grow. I appreciate this opportunity to provide testimony regarding the Mayor's Office of Education proposed budget for Fiscal Year 2020 operating budget, and thank you for the continued support of our work. We are happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you. Caught me off guard. Just a quick testimony. I want to start with community schools. It's one of our favorites. As you know, the mayor and I know a number of you all went to Euler in Cincinnati, probably to some degree the most significant and robust program as it relates to community schools, and we all had different visions. But they should, I'm happy that we understood that they should be tailored to neighborhoods and the demographics of that particular neighborhood. So I think we have, how many, 12 that we've designated so far?
Correct.
Can you briefly kind of give me a sense of where we are, the status of full-blown, or if we're at full-blown with any, but basically the status of all of the designated community school models that we have in the city.
So a brief overview of each of the 12 communities.
Pull the mic.
Close.
And introduce yourself.
Christine Piven, Deputy Education Officer. So you want a brief overview of each of the 12?
If you briefly, I mean, it's kind of, if you want to categorize them, because I know
Yes.
that we did, I think it was 2 phases of designation.
Yeah, it was a cohort
So,
one.
if you start with the ones that I guess that are not that far along, the most recent, and then the ones that we initially
Sure.
indicated.
So each of the community schools, as you know, have a full-time coordinator that was hired in partnership with the principal. Each community school did a community needs assessment, so that was with community engagement and with the school community as well. And based on that community needs assessment, they developed strategic plans to help guide the work. And depending on those community needs assessment, you may see different programs at each of the schools. This year, one of the key pieces in most of the elementary schools' strategic plans was a desire for extracurricular or after-school programs. So in the FY19 budget for community schools, we partner with the Department of Human Services to put in out-of-school time programming in those schools that didn't have any. So you could look at Gompers or Edmonds, and also Locke as well, as having new OST programming based on their community needs assessment as a piece.
Okay. Let me be more specific.
Sure.
So, I want to ask you about capital, because I've actually asked a number of the administration. So, one of the things that happened in Euler, and again, we're not Cincinnati, we're not Euler, there was a significant capital investment in the community schools. I'm not seeing that here, particularly as it relates to the revenue generated by the beverage tax. It appears that the school district has been responsible for capital investment in the ones that I'm familiar with, particularly as it relates to Gideon. And I haven't gotten an answer yet to the question that I posed. Are the community schools that have been designated eligible for capital investment from the beverage tax dollars?
So it was a policy decision that no, the dollars for community schools would not be used for capital investments in the school district schools. So those dollars are being dedicated to working on.
Can you pull that a little closer to you?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Working on investing in the program pieces of building a community school model. And so as you noted, the facilities piece, the capital piece sits with the school district.
Okay, so it was a policy discussion / decision that involved whom? Because I know I wasn't a part of that policy discussion, and I don't know if any other member of council. So and I got to tell you, when I voted for this, and it was a difficult vote, I was under the impression that the dollars generated would not only be spent for capital for rec centers, libraries, and all those things, but also spent on facilities as it related to community schools, because to me, speaking from a personal perspective, that was one of the most significant reasons for my support for the beverage tax. So how and when was that decision made not to invest any capital dollars in community schools?
That decision, when we first started with the community school original planning with the first budget, was not part of the plan when we first did it from year one with community schools in terms of making capital investments in the school. Our hope was that as we identified opportunities with the district, that we could have conversation with them around how capital improvements would be made given different facilities. So I think when the district looks at, and I don't want to get too far ahead of the district, looking at some of the issues that they have to address in the schools in terms of how they prioritize what the capital improvements are in those buildings. But in terms of from a budgeting standpoint, that was not something, especially if we look at the
Yeah, I know, you just told me that.
Right.
But I'm asking how and who made that decision that there was not going to be any capital investment in schools. This was an initiative of the city. This wasn't the school district's initiative. This is something that we wanted to do, and the school district was a part of that process after we made the decision to fund and create community schools.
So
Is there like some prohibition or limitation in the money? And I'm asking you this question because of how long it took Gideon, and I'm not sure that Gideon is at the level that it needs to be as we speak. We had to wait for the school district to patch together money to deal with the healthcare component in Gideon. And I don't understand why we're not spending capital dollars on Gideon and other similar types of initiatives in community schools. I mean, why is that?
In terms of the revenue coming in terms of what we could do with that, what we proposed in our original 5-year plan, that was not reflected that was not part of our plan in terms of doing major capital improvements in schools. Our hope was, as I stated earlier, was to work with the district, and when we saw opportunities that we would look at ways to, if there were capital improvements that needed to be made, that we would have those conversations and seek other resources, but that was not part of the original plan, and that was our office discussion.
And the administration made that decision.
Correct.
All right, that's kind of like no consultation with council members.
I would say that, especially in the first year or two, we talked a lot with council members around that plan, but we never discussed that or stated that we would make those large capital investments when we did a number of briefings. We always talked about in terms of looking at opportunities and identifying partnerships, in the future once those opportunities were identified.
All right. Would you, or maybe you could or couldn't, it may impede our ability to move in a timely way without additional capital resources in facilities where that was needed, given the school district's limitations on capital dollars to deal with crucial issues relating to environmental challenges with schools. They were probably the least likely entity within that partnership to be able to have additional dollars to come forward and deal with issues that frankly was our initiative, the city's initiative. So I'm just trying to understand why when we step to the plate and try to facilitate support for capital needs in community schools, seeing that our fund balance was much higher than the school district's fund balance, and our ability to entertain capital improvements, because the beverage tax was our tax, the city of Philadelphia's tax, and not the school district's tax. And you may not be able to answer that question today. I understand it. That was probably a determination made by, whatever level that made that decision. So I guess my question today, and you may not be able to answer this, as we move ahead, if there is a need for capital investment in a community school, because it's going to happen based on what I've been seeing, is that decision set in stone to not invest in capital needs utilizing beverage tax dollars?
I guess in terms of when you say, is it set in stone? Like I said, we would look at future opportunities if there was an opportunity where we saw that, but it is not reflected in our current budget proposal that we have this year and moving forward.
I understand.
That's
why I'm asking the question.
Yes, I would understand, and we are happy to, and I'm happy in our offices to meet with you and your team and other council members around some expectations that they have and see if that's something that we can explore moving forward.
Yeah. All right. I mean, it was a big capital investment in the initial model, which was Euler. I mean, a big capital investment. And when I look at Gideon, I'm a little, frankly, disappointed in the scope of what we've done and the pace with which we've done. But anyway, I won't get into that. All right. Okay, I'm going to pass it on. I'll come back to that. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and hello to each of you. As we were moving forward with our pre-K PHL plan, in the summer of 2016, my staff called 267 pre-K providers in my district. We ended up surveying 139 of them, and we yielded a 52% response rate, which I think was a very good sample size to ensure that we were touching base with our commercial and home-based providers. With that being said, I would like to know from you, and I'm looking at the last bit of data that we received relative to the city, and then the data for the 9th district, and I want you to tell me if there have been any changes. I know in the 9th there were 16 centers, 359 slots allocated, 347 were filled, and the average fill rate was 97%. That was just the 9th. In the city overall, we had 88, 2,234 slots, 2,063 were filled, and that was a 92.3% fill rate. Talk to us about where we are today specifically.
Shantae Brown. Good morning. I'm Shantae Brown, Interim Director for PHL Pre-K. So I'll start with Council District 9. You are right. You do have 16 total sites. That's 382 contracted slots for that council district. And that is a 99.5% average fill rate.
So, hold. 9th district, did you say a 99% fill rate?
Yes.
382 slots allocated?
Yes, and 380 of them are full.
Now, I want to give credit to you all because I think you have done a great job, but I want to give a strong shout out to my staff, because this started with us on the ground, the work that we did. I'm talking about not just the big guys, because you know my priority, let me be quite frank, has been improving the quality and access of my home-based providers in the 9th Councilmatic District. So that meant that they also had to go out and canvass. And I know you all don't do the politics, but just so you know, canvass meant that they had to go out and knock on doors of homes of people they didn't know, but where it looked on the outside like they had a home-based daycare there so that they could get access to the information. With that being said, I want to say a special thank you to my team because their work paid off. I also want to ask you now, of the city-wide sites, how many of them would you consider to be commercial and how many residential?
I would have to get back to you. I do know that in our system we have about 20 family providers currently, but I can get you the exact.
So when you say family, I'm thinking of home-based.
Yes.
Are we saying the same thing?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so you said about 20 home-based?
Yes.
Now, so for me, that is, that's the rub, right? That's the rub. How can I get more of our home-based providers engaged in the program? So when you've talked to them, what have been the barriers to entry for them?
We have not, we are one of the pre-K entities that actually partner with family providers. Some of the other two, the state program does not when it comes to the school district. So I think that's a benefit to our program is partnering with family providers. We have not really, none of our family providers have expressed any real disdain or hardships in being able to partner. I think it would just be getting the message out about the benefits to participating in PHL pre-K and the benefits for the children in the neighborhoods. I think that would be the biggest message that we would need to provide to our family-based providers.
So for me, I know your office can't support all of the pre-K providers, but since you mostly support those that are just actually in PHL pre-K, but we have to use this opportunity as a tool to get more home-based providers into the pipeline so that they are even in a position where they can participate in the program. And I know one of the tools that we simultaneously used when we had our large meeting at the York House last year was that we made sure that you all were just not there, but that Power Up was also there, because part of the home-based providers actually getting prepared to get ingrained is a lot of the technical backroom supports, access to the Capitol. So I would humbly suggest, if at all possible, while you're working on your outreach to that home-based constituency, that you, one, produce for us during this cycle, and I'll ask it during callbacks, if you have any kind of overview of a direct strategy that you're using to reach that very specific constituency. Because if we're only focusing on commercial and we're not doing all that we can do to reach the home-based providers, that is going to be very challenging, because almost on every other block in every other neighborhood, we have multiple. So I just want to make sure that that is something that is done. In addition to that, I wanted to just echo Council President Clark's comments relative to investments in community schools. Edmonds is doing well under the new leadership, and he can have an impact on what is going on inside of the building. But no matter how many volunteer efforts that we have to go and paint inside, people, I'm talking about the private sector now, who they've expressed an interest in helping us improve our schoolyard on the outside. It is very difficult when the infrastructure is crumbling. And so I do want to state for the record, Mr. President, that I will be working very hard to also advocate for the use of a portion of these funds to make capital improvements. Again, we know what Councilman, State Senator Vincent Hughes and his research, they did an awesome job with the improvements, the facility improvements, infrastructure improvements needed in the school district. It was a $5 billion price tag. We have a coalition that has been formed, and we're going to talk about on Friday our campaign this year to secure resources to address the infrastructure issue. But I think, Council President, your laser-like focus on that, we're not talking about the overall big challenge, but let's specifically carve out access to opportunity for those community schools. Not does it only, Mr. President, make good economic sense, it's worth taxpayer dollars. So I just wanted to echo those concerns, and if I'll be interested in hearing what your office's and the administration's response to that will be when you come back before council, because even if not all, because we're talking specifically about how many community schools do we have now? 12. We're talking about 12, and then we're talking about adding, is it 5 more?
Correct.
Right, so that would get us to 17?
Correct.
How very specifically, for the dollars allocated for each of those schools, can we make a portion of those dollars available for capital improvements? And I listened to your response to the council president, so I don't expect a response. I just wanted to, on the record, echo concerns about that. Thank you, Mr. President, for your leeway.
Thank you, Councilwoman. We'll always give you leeway when you're like echoing the sentiments made by the chair. Thanks, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just had a couple of questions on community schools, and the first is, well, actually, good afternoon. Let me start there. But my first question is, I was surprised when I heard that extracurricular activities were part of the community schools program. Did I hear that correctly, or?
Yes.
That's something that is being done through community schools now?
Yeah.
Because as far as I had known, the school district had always provided some level of extracurricular activities, so that's not the case anymore?
No.
Is that not?
It's
Well,
school, go ahead.
Just to clarify the difference between extracurricular activities versus out-of-school time. What we are supporting are out-of-school time activities. Schools and school budgets that can manage those extracurricular activities like sports or certain clubs, those schools are still responsible and are responsible for those EC extracurricular activities. What we're doing are out-of-school time activities.
Right.
What are out-of-school time? Can you define the difference?
Sure.
So these are in partnership with the Department of Human Services out-of-school time funded programs. So these are 5 days a week, 3 hours a day. So those are considered traditional out-of-school time programs, and those happen during the school year. And they also offer summer camps for 6 weeks as well. So it was investing in those types of programs that, again, are 5 days a week, 3 hours a day.
So I'm trying to understand, so the difference between extracurricular activities sponsored or held by the Philadelphia School District versus out-of-school time activities that are sponsored by community schools. So can you give me an example of what are out-of-school time activities?
So Oh, you can do out of school time and I'll do EC. You can do.
So for example, at Locke Elementary, we have Episcopal Community Services. So they offer various arts programs. They can do STEM, depending on the program and what they're offering, it may shift. But that's one of the pieces, and they offer various additional activities like sports and other things as well. But you can speak to
So like EC, as a principal and former basketball coach, like basketball is a extracurricular activity that is funded by the school
Right.
that would not be funded through out-of-school time slots.
So because I think of things like art as being, programs that would be offered by the school district as well. So I'm just not really clear in terms of exactly what we're offering. And I guess my surprise is that I thought that when we talked about community schools, and I guess it's just, what your assumptions are. But my assumption was that the programs offered by community schools are programs that are not traditionally offered in our schools, such as extracurricular activities, sports, art, things that, programs that kids can go to after school, but more neighborhood building, family building, community building around community schools. So I guess I'm not really clear, like how much of the out-of-school time stuff are we doing, which sounds like it's still important work,
Yeah.
but how much of the other community building stuff are we doing as well? Because, again, that's what I think a lot of folks thought of when they thought community schools.
Right. So I think, so when we think of community schools, we think of 7 different core components. So one of them is expanded learning time and opportunities.
Okay.
It's also the integrated health and social supports. It's thinking about specific things around school climate as well. And to your point, the family and community engagement. So the other areas in which we're investing as well, I hope you've seen our FY20 budget, are the adult literacy classes. So ESL and those other classes as well, and those are held at the school and to bring in parents, but also community members as well. We also engage with the Office of Arts, Culture, and the Creative Economy to invest in community public-facing arts programs. So those could be jazz concert, those could be other things as well. So there are other key investments that do bring in the community. And again, depending on the needs of that specific community, there could be other community-focused events and activities and programs that come in to attach to the community.
Are these programs throughout the community schools network?
The
Are they
adult-
evenly distributed, or do some schools have more programs than others, or?
Yeah, so the adult literacy, those are throughout the community schools, and again, that is data-driven. So some of the schools, there wasn't as much demand or need, but for example, George Washington has a high ESL population, so we have actually 4 ESL classes there. So again, it's driven by need. All of the community schools have the arts and culture, the engagement with the Office of Arts, Culture, and the Creative Economy. That's every school has that.
Okay.
And in the out-of-school time will be across. Right now, in FY19, as I said, we invested in the elementary, but now it'll be K through 12. And so looking at the high school, that'll mean focusing on summer jobs as well.
Okay. So can you give us a list, a breakdown of the programs at each community school?
Sure, I can provide that.
That would be most helpful, so that we could just get a sense. I understand, and it does make a lot of sense that you might have ESL classes in areas where there are there's a larger immigrant population and a non-English speaking population, and you want to try to be helpful there. I also want to make sure that in other areas where you have a majority low-income minority community, that there's the appropriate programs and services such as GED services, that we have multiple classes there, and things of that nature. So I'd like to see a list, if you could provide that to the president. That would be fantastic. I still have time, right? That's time. Okay. Also, I just wanted to ask regarding community schools in terms of impact and how we measure success. So now I did see in your testimony that there were a couple of performance measures which really didn't answer my question in terms of how we are measuring the success of the programs that we are placing in our community schools.
Right. So one of the
one of the pieces that the key outcome or the key benchmark that we're looking at is driving towards attendance. So really working to be a key
Attendance.
attendance, yeah. So really thinking about the programs that we're investing in and the ways in which we are connecting with community and looking at how that's driving increases and improvements in student attendance is one of our key benchmarks. But we will certainly have internal measures for each of the programs in which we are investing and working with to make sure that they are on progress depending on what their key metrics are. So for example, the adult literacy classes would have different metrics that we would be looking at as well.
Okay.
So,
Is there a way to break that down so that it's a little more obvious to us in terms of what those measurements are for success? Because again, from what was provided, I just don't get a clear sense of what we're doing, how we're making sure that we're coming out on top. I certainly understand attendance and making sure that we increase attendance wherever possible. That's very, very important. I see we went from 42% to about 60% according to your document.
yeah, on attendance.
Yes.
So that's the target.
Well, that's the target. Okay.
Yeah.
I should put my glasses on. Okay.
I don't want to.
So,
I don't want to overstate it.
okay, but your target, I see, your target is 60%.
Yeah.
So, but if we could have some additional information in terms of,
Yeah.
how are we getting there? Like, how are we, measuring these milestones along the way? How are we making sure that we reach the performance that we're really trying to get? And I think that the programs that are offered are very valuable, very important.
Yep.
But also, just some of the, when you peel back the onion, why are we doing what we're doing and why does this make sense? And just really being able to lay that out in a comprehensive argument will really be helpful, I think, to us.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I have more, but can I keep?
Well, let me get the Councilwoman. I'll come right back to you.
Okay.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kim.
Thank you very much, Council President. So I want to follow up on some of my colleagues' conversations about the community schools model. We held a teacher town hall, and one of the top things that was raised repeatedly and among teachers was the importance of prioritizing behavioral and mental health conditions in our schools, and how little support that many teachers continue to feel with larger class sizes, with the depletion of the counselors, with not having any more classroom aides, with not having as many NTAs as used to exist. We've got classrooms of 30 plus, and then you've got unmonitored hallways, bathrooms, cafeterias, recess yards, where there's no navigation of young people's ability to work with one another. We see, Mr. Hackney, you and I have worked together around issues around racial harassment and bias, about sexual harassment that occurs in these spaces when young people, this is not a natural thing that they should know how to do this. We understand that spaces have to be navigated and young people have to be taught. So, this is a place where I've been really glad to work with CBH and the school district to bring back that social worker program, to expand the concept of bringing social workers that are paid for on the city side, hired by the school district, and to double the number of social workers in schools, but also reformat social workers so that they actually serve the whole school and not individual children, so that we're revising the old CSAP model of just having millions of dollars wrap around individual kids, but having a whole school feel kind of bereft of a lot of supports. And I've also been really impressed by Gideon School and their effort to expand on the behavioral health suite and have a calming down room. Dobbin students under the leadership of Tony Damon distribute fresh produce to their communities while learning about the value of nutrition. So, the question I guess I have is, how much is the community schools looking to validate an understanding that mental behavioral health as it relates to children's ability to navigate the school environment is actually directly impacting the climate of the school and hopefully leading towards opportunities for academic success?
Thank you for the question. I think what we've done in the Mayor's Office of Education and to highlight what from my testimony this morning was working with other city departments. So we have really great relationships with those city departments, and I think some of them are probably coming up this afternoon to talk about supports that we put in schools and a great partnership with the school district. That's why we asked Karen Lynch to join us today to talk about those exact services that are taking place, but to highlight the level of partnership that we have between the Mayor's Office of Education, those city departments, and the school district.
And I definitely appreciate Karen Lynch being here. Thank you so much. But I really do want to ask the Mayor's Office of Education to what extent you are prioritizing the the behavioral and mental health needs of young people in the community schools model. So what is it looking like? So I see it very clearly at Gideon. We had to complement it by pushing for a school security officer and other types of things. But what is the mayor's office, how does mental behavioral health fit into your understanding of what community schools can and should do? And how are you evaluating it? And what kind of supports are you, is the city giving, not so much the school district doing, but the city giving towards that effort?
It's one of our core components in terms of integrated health services. We have out of our community schools 8 are in our STEP programs where they do have a social worker in those buildings.
Every community school has a social worker?
No, 8.
Okay, 8.
Of those schools have, if I'm correct.
Would you want every community school to have a social worker? I mean, would that be something?
Is that Otis Hackney pie in the sky, or just?
No. This is not pie in the sky.
No. So in terms of, I think that is in terms of the partnership that we have between the city departments and the district are helping us to determine what the right number is because of the complexity of that work. Karen, do you want to speak to? Okay.
I don't think so. Right. I mean, I would like to know, would the Mayor's Office of Education push to have a social worker in every community school?
Well, we will work with those departments to see if that is possible. If it was something in terms of providing the support, especially where you would want to prioritize schools first, that would need that social worker. We would work with the district and other city departments to see if we can make that happen.
Because my understanding is that CBH may actually be expanding its social worker model, and if that is the case, would the mayor's office make the case that community schools should have a top priority for any additional social workers? Or are they looking to do, is that a conversation?
We are at the table in those discussions. So, I mean, those discussions between CBH, the school district, and community schools, we are at the table in terms of how those resources are designated. But we want to be very thoughtful to schools that are community schools, but other district schools that also may be of high need that have not been designated community schools at this time.
When the community schools did a survey of need amongst its own, I think you did an early survey, right? Mm-hmm. What would you say was the number one need that was cited by most of the schools?
I'm trying to remember from the year one.
Yeah, I would certainly say behavioral health was a key need. And again, to reiterate what Otis said, I mean, the community schools that are part of the STEP program are part of the STEP program because they're community schools, so they are being prioritized. Oh, sorry. No, can't hear me. Sorry. So in that sense, I mean, we are working with the departments to make sure that community schools are prioritized. But again, that is a conversation with the school district, looking, obviously, to your point, looking at the data, making sure that it's the right resource for that school.
Is there any downside to social workers in schools?
No.
Okay. I mean, part of the reason why I ask is because I think this is a newer partnership and we're trying to build out a sense of understanding and public will, and to the extent that, I mean, the school district is already working hard in this area, CBH is working hard in this area, and I think what I'm trying to understand is whether the Mayor's Office of Education is not just at the table, but whether there is a big push in this area, that this is an area where I think, you know, when we talk about integration or complementing of city services with our school district, this is one of the areas where we have DHS social workers and CBH, and we've got federal grant access. Is there a possibility that, like, a unified push together between the district, CBH, DHS and the Mayor's Office of Ed can actually help accomplish what many people thought was impossible, which was to really get a synergy around this effort?
The answer to that would be yes. We would very much like to see that.
Okay. I'll come back for a couple other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Down.
Thank you, Council President. Good afternoon. I have a few questions. The first one is, how many of the pre-K providers have had their Keystone Stars rating upgraded since taking part in Philadelphia pre-K?
At the initial start of the program, we had 39 growth providers. So 35 of those folks have moved into quality. And we've had 3 that have exited the system since the initial start. So those folks did not move. But the folks that are still here, 35 of them have moved.
Okay, thank you. The performance measures show that through December, there were 2,120 students enrolled in Philadelphia pre-K. Any idea how many might be enrolled now?
Right, currently, as of March 2019, I apologize, we have 2,160 approved enrollments for PHL pre-K.
2,160, okay.
Yes.
And I don't remember the numbers when we approved the program. What is the rough cost per seat in pre-K?
The allocation for providers is $8,500.
$8,500.
Yes. And that is aligned to the state rate for pre-K counts providers as well.
And of the $33 million proposed for the PHMC contract, is there any way we can see a breakdown of how much of that is for administrative costs?
Yes, their admin fee cost is 10%, but we can
10%.
definitely break down the numbers for you. But
Okay.
yes, it's 10%.
And then the records that I have, I just want to verify this. The beverage tax so far has generated about $137 million through fiscal year 19. And $31.7 million has been spent, or about 23.2%, on pre-K. $3.5 million, or 2.5%, has been spent on community schools. $605,000, or 0.4%, was spent on rebuild, which means there's about $101 million, or 74%, remaining in the general fund. Can we get a verification of those numbers?
We can get back to you on to verify those numbers, yes.
Okay. And then the last question is, I'm a big, by the way, this council, a few weeks ago, passed a resolution asking the state of Pennsylvania to provide and require mandatory pre-K to 12th grade financial literacy, mandatory technology and coding courses taught pre-K to 12th grade, entrepreneurship courses 7th to 12th grade, and allowing students in high school to work 1 day a week, 9th to 12th grade, in a job and get credit for that work. Now, the state has to make that happen.
Right.
I don't know when that will happen. But for a moment, and we're talking about community schools, is there any way we could adopt some of those ideas into the community schools? For example, like financial literacy and maybe some of the technology?
Yes. Yeah, and one of the areas in which we're beginning to partner more deeply is with the Office of Workforce Development around really thinking about how we put in place a career development framework. So I think this would be a great place to make a
So
connection.
let me be more specific with you. You know, the Federal Reserve has a program to teach financial literacy. And if we can provide the funding for it, not through your budget, would you be willing to commit to having the teachers in the community schools take the program at the Federal Reserve? They get paid for their time, they get paid for the course. We've already had 122 school teachers, including pre-K, go through the financial literacy courses. They're now teaching over 3,000 students. But I'm trying to make the community schools the model where maybe we can get every teacher to teach financial literacy in community schools.
Yes, we'll explore that with the school district too.
So can we reach out to you in my office? Because I'd like to see that happen.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Before I call on Councilwoman Gim, I want to revisit my earlier questions. Community schools. community schools are supposed to be way beyond, just from our perspective. I know you guys, we pass the money, we appropriate, we vote the tax. It goes to the executive branch, and the executive branch kind of like say, okay, we got the money, we're going to do what we're going to do, right? Which is, that's part of the deal, right? There's a lot of that going down on Washington, say, oh, you can't have the money for the fence, and I'm not comparing the two. But you gave us money over here, we're going to spend it on the fence, or the wall. So this response on the community schools, I'm really not comfortable with that, about your 5-year plan for no capital improvement. This issue about after school, every time we go to a building, you go to a community, and the whole premise about community schools was we didn't have all different types of services in neighborhoods. Just the whole spin when we were convincing people this is the way to go. But there's a school in every neighborhood. There may not be a doctor in every neighborhood, a clinic. There may not be a library in every neighborhood. There may not be this and that, but there's a school in every neighborhood in the city. And this community school was supposed to be the beacon. So it's best possible if we can expand those after-school services. We go to a school, and we yesterday, and thank you again for yesterday, we're talking about the ability to use the school in after hours for really good programs, and it's like 16,000. I forget what the number was. They were being asked to pay the local community group. Why are we doing it? Why aren't we utilizing the community school money, the pre-K money? I'm sorry, the beverage tax money, to go beyond simply hiring school coordinators. And we got some good school coordinators, but I mean, why are we not using this money for genuine community schools? I mean, adult opportunities, recreational opportunities, all the things that we should. If you want to just keep it to operational, say, okay, well, I can't spend it on capital for whatever reason. I don't understand that, but then why don't we use that money to pay for the engineer and all the other things that are required to keep schools open in the after hours? I mean, this very narrowly tailored community school model, I'm really not feeling.
So it may be that I misunderstood when you talked about capital investments. So the community schools model, the community schools are paying to keep buildings open for community activities. So the adult literacy.
They are? So
Yes.
you have to be a community school to have the building open after hours, to get paid for. Because we went to a school, not to cut you off, but we went to a school, and all the schools, you got to pay. These community groups have to pay to keep the schools open after hours.
Correct. So that has been a policy of the district in terms of if organizations want to use the buildings after hours or weekends, that they would have to pay a certain cost. With community schools, if there are programs that are in partnership with us or certain programs, so like at Dobbins is open on Saturdays. There's a number of programs that take place.
Paid for by
and it is under the community
money?
schools umbrella.
Okay.
So I think what is not highlighted in our budget detail are actual programs and events that are taking place. And I think what might be helpful is, because we do weekly reports, that we could provide summaries by school of different type of events and activities that are taking place after school and on weekends, and that are in partnership with our office in the district in those schools.
Okay.
So it's hard to capture all of those in terms of food drive activities to, like I said, the adult education classes that are taking place, but also, to highlight Dobbins, like Get Fit Saturdays at Dobbins are, and they are well attended by members in that community, to even programs, and Christine probably can speak to it better, in terms of there's a partnership with adults that are going into the culinary arts field and trainings that have been hosted in partnership with our community schools. And Dr. Damon is a great partner with that. So we can
So
highlight
we're
a number
doing
of
that.
programs. Oh,
Okay.
yes.
I'll withdraw that, and I'll shift back to capital. All right, but I just want to say that, and thank you for that information, because the need is way beyond just simply the daytime hours. It's probably to some degree more so because we have to deal with the adult population in these neighborhoods. We're making progress with our children, but we're not making near the progress that I like to see for the adult educational process, skills gap, the whole 9 yards, dealing with poverty. So those community schools are really something that we should utilize in full force. So I'm glad to hear we're doing that. All right, okay, just wanted to piggyback on that, to emphasize the importance of that. Chair recognizes Councilwoman McGinn.
Thank you very much, Council President. So one of the, I'm interested in learning and hearing from you, like what you're learning about community engagement and our community schools. In particular, do community schools manage parent and community engagement different from district schools that you feel like? I've heard from a lot of caregivers and organizations, institutions about the struggles that many schools have to maintain, like what used to be a parent ombudsman role, but a community-based role to help people navigate attendance issues, academic supports, behavioral concerns, and the loss of that parent ombudsman community contact has been profound for some of the communities. So to what extent do community schools have a different point of contact for parents and other community members? And is that something that the community school coordinator directly plays, and are you studying it in any way?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the school, and but there's a relationship with the FACE staff that's there and the community school coordinator, and really thinking about how to work with parents, but also with the community as well. One of the areas that we're working to focus on as we move forward in FY20 is we've put in an application for a VISTA to really think about how to structure more parent and community involvement in the school in discrete ways, so being able to make that a stronger structure. Yeah. Does that answer? Go ahead.
So in terms of additional pieces, our offices work very closely with the principals. I know in our schools, in terms of like when it comes to parent and student surveys, trying to increase the number of responses because that information is beneficial to us and to the district and to obviously those principals in those buildings. And also what they're able to do during their school day, because they're not limited to the building, so they can go and do continuous outreach to different partners that are in the community and align resources that are there, so that way they can do that additional outreach. To highlight a program that just happened is at Gideon, where our students worked with a city department and did an asset map of their community in Strawberry Mansion. And so there was, the students out learning about what resources, or lack thereof, they learned a lot about their community, but that was in a program that took place over a number of weeks, and they presented their findings here in the city regarding Strawberry Mansion. So that level of outreach and getting, so working, from the outside in, but also getting the students out to look at their neighborhood in a different way, we also include in terms of that, how they engage people in the community, but also the community itself.
Yeah. So I want to say that I'm very deeply invested in the community schools model. I think it's something that we've fought for a long time. I think people have really thought about, what ultimately it should be able to do, especially when we're trying to define a much healthier and holistic vision of not only the rights of a child, but like the role of public schools in a complicated 21st century, especially in our city, where there is a lot of competition around other alternatives. I would just urge you to, especially as a community schools coordinator, that depends on the school is not exactly the best approach. Like part of the issue is that we want a disciplined approach towards how we look at the very limited resources that both you and the school district have. And the strongest thing that we lacked in the prior administration was the ability to integrate the city services, our strengths as a city, with real deficits within the school district. I would say that one of them, which has been clearly identified, is around behavioral mental health, and that there's a lot of opportunity to do that. But the other one is around that community input. I know that Mr. Hackney knows this really well, but that many communities feel so isolated, and once you burn that bridge with a community member or a parent, those things last a long time, and people lose trust, and they talk about it. But on a very much more serious level, truancy is one of the number one reasons why children are removed from their families. It has massive consequences. If the school district does not have the ability to meet the needs of parents and community members who are trying to figure this out, or like we're not following up, you know, the community school ability to address attendance truancy would go a long way towards like meeting a lot of city problems, not just school district issues, but it is a really close alignment. So we can talk further. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And then the last question that I have is, as you expand to 20 more community schools, what are the metrics that you're using to look at this last batch of schools? And you know, you have a huge number of schools, dozens of schools who are clamoring to be part of the model. What are you hoping to fill out? What are schools that you think are missing from your cohort that you hope to include in terms of better understanding what the possibilities are of this model?
Yeah, so I think part of what we are looking at in terms of picking the next set of schools is looking at their SBR scores, looking at the youth poverty in that area. We're also doing site visits with various schools to really understand the leadership's capacity and willingness to take on this model and really think about where they are in their process of embracing the community school model in terms of their existing partnerships and such.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. That appears to be all the questions for the Mayor's Office of Education. We're going to take a break until around 1:45, at which time we will hear from the Manager and Director's Office. Thank you.
For the record, we should start in the next 2 minutes. The budget hearings, Managing Director's Office is up next. Good afternoon, please. Mr. Abernathy?
Good afternoon, Councilman Greenlee, and Councilman Jones, and members of the committee. My name is Brian Abernathy. I'm the city's managing director. I'm joined today with Tumar Alexander, my first deputy, and Chris Root, my chief of staff. We've submitted our testimony for the record, and we're happy to answer any questions.
That really is brief. You've been around here a few times, haven't you? Okay. I know this general subject was broached this morning, I think with Mr. Engler, but we notice in the budget, there's a number of items that were put in by City Council that are removed in this year's budget, including Energy Authority, Animal Control, CLIP, reductions in same. Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Project. Was there any, I think individual council members are particularly interested in this. Was there any discussion with them before this reduction?
You know, I think as the budget is put together, we all have to try and prioritize what that
A little
submission.
closer, Mike.
I'm sorry.
Brian, please. Yeah.
As we put together the budget, we all have to figure out our priorities as we move forward, and I think it's always a conversation. I see the budget process as a conversation, and this is the initial submission, but certainly I don't expect this budget to be passed in its current form.
No, and we know that. I guess it's just that, you know, a lot of these things, you have to assume council members are going to be interested again, you know? And to just take them out and just say, okay, it's almost like, okay, now it's a new request. Well, it's not really a new request because we have it in there. We requested it before, so it's, for the record, doesn't sit a little right with some of the members, I would say.
Understood.
Particularly on, you know, we've talked about the animal control issue and the whole idea to get to the no-kill aspect, or make this a no-kill city. I know we've talked about that vector control issue with them moving at some point. Is that anywhere close? Because that will give more room, right, to have
So
in the building up there.
yes, sir. So we have explored moving vector from the building, which would allow animal control to expand. There are significant costs associated with that for the health department. We haven't been able to figure out how to prioritize those costs over some of our other key core programs. I think, having said that, we are still investing in animal control. From our submitted budget last year, we are increasing by $100,000 in their general operating budget. We've also, in the capital budget, are paying for a new roof for the building as well as new kennels.
Now, what is the 200,000 reduction that we understand in the budget? What is that? What was that for? I'm trying to remember.
So it was a general operating support that was added at the end of the budget cycle last year. We're able to, without any additional dollars from the budget, we are able to maintain, that reduction is actually going to be 100,000 as we.
I'm sorry, say again?
We're actually going to add 100 on top of that.
So we're actually adding, so that original $200,000 decrease was part of the caucus amendment. Through the managing director's work on our budget, we're actually increasing the original FY19 allocation by $100,000. So you actually will see an increase from FY19 from 4.26 million to 4.36 million. So you're actually seeing an increase, not a decrease.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. One other thing, and I know Councilman Jones has some questions. CLIP, we know, is very popular, and this is my last budget meeting or budget time to recognize the Tom Conway Annual Appreciation Day. But our understanding is there's 100,000 reduction in that. Is that accurate, and is that what? Because none of it, no one knows like to see, most want to see CLIP expanded more than reduced. So do you know what that's about?
So last year there was an increase of $100,000 at the end of the budget process for alley trees. We are actually increasing CLIP from FY19 estimated obligation of $6.43 million to $6.64 million, so an increase of $216,000.
Okay, you're but you took out the 100,000 for the. I'm a little lost there.
For the alley trees.
I'm trying to figure that out. Huh?
Yes.
Because the alley trees, I know you hear a lot of members talk about that, so. You know.
Certainly, and I think there are still ways that we can address the alley trees as well. I think we've recognized that CLIP is an important function of the city, and the managing director's office is certainly committed to the program and to Mr. Conway to make sure that he continues to provide the great services to all of our district council members.
Okay. I guess if the council president was sitting here, he'd note that the things that council put in there, you're taking out, but you're putting other things in, correct?
We are trying to manage our budget the best that we can, recognizing what council's priorities are, but also what the administration's priorities are. That's why we've been able to find additional funding for animal control. That's why we were able to find additional funding for CLIP in our current allocation.
And one last thing that appears to be in here, which is fairly significant, and I know Councilwoman Kim and others, including myself, been interested in. It's the Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Project. We're told $850,000 reduction?
And so it's actually it's a $350,000 reduction. So we are funding
$350,000. Okay.
We are funding the eviction defense fund at a level of $500,000. That's our original proposal. Again, this is a proposal that we expect to continue conversations through the budget cycle. This is important work. We recognize the success of the program. It's work that we have every intention of continuing. But again, we're trying to balance budgets as we go forward. And again, this is a starting point.
I got you. And a lot of priorities out there.
There
I
are
get
a
you.
lot of priorities,
I get
yes,
you.
sir.
I understand. Right. There's one other thing, but I have a feeling Councilman Jones may mention this, so I'm going to leave it alone. Councilman Jones?
Mr. Chairman, and by the way, about your last budget hearing, there is an aggressive write-in campaign as we speak being organized.
If elected, I refuse to serve. How about that?
That's pretty definitive, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Dom tried that also.
So, good afternoon, and particularly congratulations as you now are in the big chair as managing director, and congratulations. That's a classic case of working your way up. I remember when you were on our side of the aisle, frustrated with the questions and answers that sometimes the administration would or would not provide, so everybody gets a fair term. I'd like to focus my questions on a couple of areas. One, criminal justice reform and the evolution of that being implemented by your office, and also the violence prevention effort that you've kind of undertaken as well. So you came in and jumped headfirst in the pool. So we'd like to get some responses to that and get a sense of, particularly, we've had hearings on the plan, and it is an ambitious plan that is multifaceted. It incorporates partnerships with the community. It incorporates breaking down silos of departments to have holistic participation, and we think that is good. Now the question I have is how we paying for it. So, question being, is a lot of those dollars already existing dollars, and how much of those dollars are additional funds being added to the effort? So, Julie, you should be already working your way up here. And also, I'm sorry.
There we go.
You know you're coming next. So we want to kind of get a better sense of that, and which departments particularly are going to bear that burden of financing this effort. And I want to thank you publicly for taking on this task. You could have gone anywhere in government. You chose violence prevention. So you could, if you would give a brief overview for people who may not have heard about the plan, but also sharing the responsibility of funding that plan, and then we'll go to you.
Vanessa Garrett Harley, Deputy Managing Director for Criminal Justice and Public Safety. The Philadelphia Roadmap to Safer Communities is a 5-year comprehensive plan around violence prevention as well as violence reduction. It is looking at the violence in the city, gun violence in particular, as the mayor has rightfully called it out, as a public health crisis, and taking a public health approach as to how do we address the violence in the city. It is a sort of comprehension because we're trying to look at the root causes of the violence. While certainly there is a significant portion of the plan that does involve collaboration and our work with the police department, it also involves many additional city agencies as we try to look at what other services, communities, as well as the victims and the perpetrators of these crimes may need to be able to change the trend, as unfortunately we're currently trending upwards in the numbers of shootings and homicides in the city.
So I guess my question becomes, I think the number that has ranged is about $34 million in addressing that effort. And what I want to guess is, how much of that is existing dollars? How much of that is new appropriations?
Sure. It's actually a $31 million commitment.
I was
over
trying to
5
add
years.
for 4 more.
I understood, I appreciate it too. It's a $31.4 million commitment. All of that is in new funding. Some of it was added in FY19, but it was funding that did not exist prior to FY19. The funding is broken down in the Managing Director's office between 3 programs for $1 million total. That is $500,000 for CCIP, the Community Crisis Intervention Program, another $250,000 in addition to YVRP's base funding, and another $250,000 for community grants. With the FY19 dollars should carry over, so we should have about a $750,000 to $1 million pool for community grants in FY20. In addition, the police department is being funded at $1.7 million in FY20. L&I is receiving funding of $1.75 for blight remediation, and the MDO is receiving another nearly $1 million in FY20, which will increase to over $3 million by the end of FY24 for neighborhood resource centers.
So that's the price tag. How are we doing on collaboration within departments? You have DHS, you have the police department, and others. How is that working?
I feel over the past, I'm going to actually take a step back. What we've learned in the Resilience Project in Kensington is the importance of breaking down barriers, breaking down boundaries, breaking down silos. And I think we've also been able to create a different level of engagement between departments. And so I'll let Vanessa speak in more detail, but I believe that the collaboration between departments is stronger than it's ever been certainly in my tenure on the administration side. And I believe that, this is what having a strong chief operating officer should be able to provide, ways for all of my deputies who are working in different clusters, who may have different perspectives, come to bear, have solid conversations, and create a plan that we can implement. And then if there are portions of that plan that aren't effective, be able to make changes and adjust quickly.
So the reason I say that is because in Game of Thrones, they say winter is coming. In Philadelphia, we say summer is coming, and it has the exact opposite.
So the collaboration amongst the various city departments are going extremely well. Not only were they part of the work group that helped create the plan, but we had built into the plan a governance structure which includes an implementation team so that we could make sure that the plan actually gets implemented and does not just become another piece of paper. The implementation team is chaired by myself and Police Commissioner Ross, and we meet every other week. Because we understand the importance of it. And so you can imagine at that implementation team table is the executive level of the various departments. Some of the key departments is Office of Workforce Development, School District is there, the Department of Behavioral Health, Department of Public Health, the DHS is there, Parks and Rec, all of the integral parts of the plan is there, and everybody is working quite well together so that we can overlay this stuff. And we do understand the urgency of the work that we've undertaken, and in particular understanding that summer and the hot weather is coming, which sometimes impacts the work that we're doing.
Well, I'm encouraged to hear that this administration, Mayor Kenny, is committed also to not only putting his money where his mouth is by appropriations, but the memo goes to the various departments to understand that from top down, we are a part of a team to address this. And that's what I appreciate. They talked about the resource centers. I always call them day reporting centers, but they're actually Philadelphia, what do you call them, Julie? I'm sorry. What's the new name?
I'll say Julie Wertheimer, Senior Director, Office of Criminal Justice. Their neighborhood resource centers is what we've landed on for now, Councilman. As you know, we're excited to see them come to fruition in the form of pilot funding for FY20. The intention is building on collaboration through the MacArthur-funded efforts and other efforts, but it will allow us to co-locate services, both community-based services and city services, along with probation officers, so that people, and specifically the medium to high-risk population, can report to their probation officer somewhere in or close to their community rather than downtown, while also having access to an array of supportive services.
So for those of us who don't speak fluent government, that is a situation where instead of going to State Road, people can be deferred to a location where they still have an onus to be responsible for their acts, but also get a portion of that time to work on whatever the causal effects are for criminal behavior, and in a cost-effective manner, and engaging the community in the process. Is that right?
Right, and recognizing that some of these folks may have transportation barriers that may make it difficult for them to report. You know, now probation is at 7th and Market, and so getting down there. Whereas if they can go to somewhere that's a few blocks from their home, they're more likely to be able to go and be in compliance with the terms of their probation.
So similar, how are you finding the breaking down of traditional silos going in this process?
So I think we've been fortunate with our partners in the courts, the DA, the defender, in addition to all of the city departments that are involved in the criminal justice work, in that we've been collaborating under the MacArthur Grant since 2015, which has led to a 43% reduction in the jail population since. And we use that table and that structure to kind of create an outgrowth, with your leadership for the neighborhood resource centers. And it fits into all of the other efforts. We were recently refunded by the MacArthur Foundation for $4 million for the next 2 years. And there are significant probation reforms or new programs in that grant. And so NRC's fits with that, fits with the Philadelphia Roadmap for Safer Communities, and a lot of our other efforts.
So we've gone on a lot of road trips from New York to other counties to look how it's done there. One of the big issues is probation. How are we working with our partners there?
Chief Miller, who just assumed the role of chief, has been an engaged partner on a lot of our collaborative work since she was deputy chief. And so I think that we are working to carefully craft numerous ways to address those who are in on violations of probation as the largest driver of our jail population right now, while trying to take a holistic approach of looking at the whole system. We never try to focus on one singular issue or singular department because that can perpetuate the silos. Instead, we try to look at all the different pieces.
A large task, to say the least.
Councilman, if I could.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so
Give everybody a chance here.
any location yet?
We do not have a location.
Good answer. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
sir. Thank you. Councilman Dobb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I have a few questions. I just wanted to start off by asking, in the budget for the managing director's office 2 years ago, when you're looking at your testimony on page 3, section 39, it says the fiscal 2018 obligations were $100 million roughly. And then it says in 2019, you came to this body and we approved, I guess, $106.6 million. And it looks like we ran over last year $5 million because we wound up spending $111 million. And now we're asking for $115 million. And I guess my question is, over the last 2 years, this budget's gone up 15% or 7.5% per year, far greater than the rate of inflation, which the last 2 years is probably 2.5%. What do you attribute those increases to? I see personal services is probably the biggest issue of increase.
There are a handful of things that have attributed the increase. One are continued increases to the Defenders Association to work on pay parity between the district attorney, the law department, and the defenders. We also had a new fee schedule implemented for outside counsel for indigent defense. We've also added in the managing director's office a number of key programs to tackle priorities and rebuild, being one of them. Municipal ID, the census in this fiscal year is being added to the managing director's budget, as well as violence prevention.
And
police assisted diversion, thank you.
Is that over covering this $15 million increase the last 2 years?
In broad strokes, yes. I can get you a complete breakdown at a later time, but that's broad strokes, yes.
The detailed breakdown would be helpful.
Yes, sir.
And then I'm not sure this is in your area, but I can go to another question if it isn't. The hiring of people for the city, do you have any, is that under managing director?
So the Chief Administrative Officer oversees HR and is the current, the interim personnel director.
Right.
But certainly each department has a large role in the hiring of their staff.
But they're not in your umbrella.
So HR is not in my umbrella specifically, but again, a lot, HR, I would say, serves the departments. And so if you have a specific question, I might be able to answer it,
I
but
have just a general question, because I know Pew did a report, and it seems to me that it takes a very long time for somebody who applies for a job with the city to actually get the job. And I guess my question is, how do we streamline that process? Because if I was applying for a job with the city and I had to wait 6 months to a year, I'd probably go somewhere else.
that is more of a question for the CAO, but we are working in conjunction with her to be able to address those issues, because to your point, if we have vacancies that are that can't be filled or it takes too long to fill, we lose very qualified candidates, and the work suffers itself. I will say the CAO has been a tremendous partner in addressing those concerns, and we started to see improvements in that hiring process already.
What do you think is causing that delay, in your opinion?
I think there's a few things that cause the delay. One, I think civil service is complicated. And the way we have historically managed our civil service lists, where we have a list that stays open for 2 years, causes some challenges. Now, I don't think we need to change civil service, but I think we need to streamline civil service. We need to figure out a way how to enter into rolling testing. So when we do find a qualified candidate for engineers or for the fire department or for or surveys, any of our hard to fill positions, we can slot them into a test in the near term, and we will always have vacancies in certain departments. Engineers comes to mind immediately as a specifically hard to fill position.
Right.
And I think we need to do a better job both recruiting, testing, and streamlining that process.
And to me, that's when I talk to department heads, that's one of the biggest problems we have in the city right now, is the ability to hire people in a timely way. And then there's even some rules that if you interview 2 people, you must hire one of them, even though they're not qualified.
Yes, I think that is. So I wouldn't say necessarily that they're not qualified. I think there are specific provisions that are in the civil service, and so I have challenged some of our department heads to really look at their job specs, and whether those specs are appropriate or they need to be changed, whether we're testing for the right things. So while I think Christine Dorenick-Lopez, our CAO, is making tremendous changes in HR and really providing them the support that they need and the leadership that they need, I'd also say that our departments need stronger and some thoughtful leadership around HR themselves. You know, I think you and I have talked about financial acumen in certain departments. I would say that HR acumen in certain departments is also a weakness.
So to that point, and let me go back. Right now, what is the average time? If someone said to me, hey, I want to apply for a job with the city, what's the average time it takes for us to apply, go through the process, and then hear from the city whether or not they're hired?
I don't have that information with me today, and I would also say it's going to vary tremendously between departments and positions as well. But we can certainly get back to you, and also we'll make sure that we have a conversation with the CAO so she's prepared.
What do you think is a good goal to try to achieve from when somebody applies to when we can give them an answer? Is it 30 days, 45 days?
You know, I think the challenge on that question is, for an engineer, my answer is going to be different than for a sanitation worker, or for a police officer, or for a firefighter, or a paramedic. And so I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. I do think that having someone wait for 2 years and then us surveying and auditing the list to see if they're still interested in the position isn't the most effective or efficient way to manage our HR hiring.
Okay. And I have some other questions. Beginning with the submission of this proposed fiscal year 2016 operating budget, going back to that time, the finance director was to submit to council, together with the mayor's proposed annual operating budget, an annual information technology strategic plan that followed the information technology strategic plan procedure adopted by the managing director. It's under section 21-2502. Have we prepared an information technology strategic plan for this year?
Not to my knowledge. However, I would say OIT reports to the CAO. In 2016, the CAO, or the OIT reported to the managing director. And so I think we'll have to get back to you with more detail.
Okay, I'll come back the next round. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Before I recognize Councilman Jones again, another reduction we see in here, and I don't know if anything was added somewhere else. Mr. Abernathy, in the Philadelphia Unemployment Project, the 55,000 reduction, I think it was the reason it was put in, I know Councilman Green, Councilwoman Parker, and myself and a lot of others, for the reverse commuting issue. Do you know, is that planned to be, is that somewhere else that we can't find? Or?
At this point, no, it is not somewhere else.
Pardon me?
No, at this point, it is not anywhere else.
So there's nothing in there for that?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. Was there some reason for that? Was it checked out? Did it not feel to be worthy, or?
Again, I think as we go through the budgeting process, we try to set priorities, and certain things get cut and certain things get funded. And so I think, again, it's a priority conversation, and again, I expect that to be part of an ongoing conversation with council.
Yeah, I think there will be a push to get that and maybe more in, because we have found it helps people keep jobs,
Yes,
which
sir.
is, I think a lot of people think is kind of important, so. And one other thing, the census, I see you're adding 11 employees, and you say about the dedicated team of organizers we charge of working with community-based organizations. So that's where those people are going to be, basically?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and do you work in conjunction with the federal folks on that, or?
Yeah, I actually think either Stephanie Monahan or Deputy Director Otero Cruz.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Stephanie Reed.
Hi, how are you?
I was recently married.
Yeah.
I'm still not used to it.
It's okay.
Huh.
Executive Director of Philly Counts.
Yes.
We are working very closely with the Census Bureau, so the first month that I was
A
on.
little closer, Mike, again.
Yeah, sure. So the first month I was on was primarily spent meeting with the Census Bureau. I meet with them every other week on Friday afternoons, and we will be looking at how our plan complements their plan.
Okay, all right, thanks. Do you want to add something?
I didn't know if you had any other further questions.
Okay. No, that's basically it. We just wanted to see how it was working. And obviously, it's a very worthwhile endeavor, so appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
Councilman Jones?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Just on the census, in the last census, I've been around long enough to have experienced that, the 4th District lost 5,000 people. So what that meant was an expansion into North Philadelphia. Thanks to President Clark, we picked up some population, but we want to pay particular attention to that so that we're not undercounted. And by way of criminal justice reform, particularly among incarcerated individuals, other counties, Frackville and other places, count our population as theirs and then receive CDBG subsidies and things of that nature, building playgrounds in Podunk, Pennsylvania, as opposed to North Philly, West Philly, South Philly, and others. So we really count on you to make, play on words, the proper count. So we are counting.
So John Otero Cruz, Deputy Managing Director of Community Services, and we are aware that the last count was 63%. And so we are really working with Stephanie and her team to build an infrastructure to ensure that we're working with both state and the federal partners, as well as other coalitions across the state, to really focus on building a community's infrastructures, committees to really work with how do we get to those difficult to count populations. And so that is something that we're working on collectively.
We appreciate that. Could I have Tamar Alexander come up to the table, along with a representative from the Office of Special Events? Is there anyone here for?
This is the Tommy Conway Hour?
So, no,
I would never ask.
Tommy treatment?
I would never ask Giselle a direct question, so I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity to ask some questions now. Two quick things. First of all, welcome, and can you describe your new responsibilities? You're like 3 administrations in, so can you tell us what?
Make me feel old, Councilman.
You're young.
Thank you. So my new role is First Deputy Managing Director, really supporting the Office of Managing Director and supporting the Managing Director. I work a lot on a resiliency project, along with some work with Vanessa on violence prevention and other programs.
Good. So my direct question is, recently there has been an effort to quell violence in this way. A lot of it has centered around block parties. And there was a proliferation of violence, and some blocks actually were asked not to apply for a permit. In your anticipation of the summer months, how is that going to work? I know you guys give permits, but also it is done.
It's really not a special events office thing. It's really a streets department piece, but it's always been sort of cross communication with police department and streets throughout the years, even before the sort of process changed. I think what this process allowed us to do a little closely from the police department level is to drill down and have the unit and the sort of district sort of drill down and outreach more to those blocks and get to know those folks over the winter months. And all we're really trying to focus and sort of curate a dialogue with folks. So, for instance, there were blocks that may have applied and got denied, and the captain took it upon himself, or the community relations officer took it upon themselves to sort of go out, reach out to the blocks, and sort of build that relationship in anticipation of us working together to be able to host events for them. I don't know if Mike want to come and talk more about where that process is as it relates to the streets department, but that's something that we sort of worked on to make sure we streamline it for the person applying, where they don't have to go to 2 separate places to sort of get that approval.
So one other thing, I would encourage us looking at rec centers and recreation yards to try to encourage more of those activities there. If we built a stage, gave them access to electric, and maybe some pavilions, they might be inclined more to do activities there.
That's a good idea. We're going to work with finance and capital to see if we can pilot that in your district with some ITEF support. Let's try it.
You know, I have other colleagues here, but it all begins in the United States of the 4th District. So,
I would just add that, we came,
Mike.
I'm sorry.
Oh, Nate,
Michael
yeah.
Carroll, Deputy Managing Director, Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability. Pardon me, Councilman, I would just add that we did discover that there was opportunity for improvement in the application process. And so what had been happening was there was essentially an approval or denial that the applicant was getting, sometimes without the follow-up to explain that there was interaction with police, and sometimes the interaction with police was not contained within the review process itself. So what we've done is we've made sure that the city all gets on the same page before we communicate with the applicant to let them know what's going on. And so at least through the application process, we don't have that confusion.
is it true we have a list of blocks that are prohibited from having block parties? That's an urban legend.
Sure, so it's not a list of blocks that are prohibited from block parties. The captain does weigh in to the approval of block parties, and so we'll consider what's happening, what are the current events, what is the current are there current challenges in that block that a block party might heighten tension by bringing 2 groups together that maybe should stay apart, and that's
Makes
the captain's. Yeah, it's the captain's decision, but there's no list.
Urban legend. Can I have the Office of Special Events back up, please? State your name for the record.
Aliyah Gee, Office of Special Events. Hello, Councilman.
How are you?
I'm
You're
wonderful.
a
How are
constituent.
you?
So I'm going to treat
I
you
am a
nice. You all right?
constituent.
I know it's election time. I'm not going to bother you.
She looked scared when she
Yeah, no,
walked
she
up there.
does.
I'm saying, geez.
So I just want to point out that you guys have received a special award a couple years straight. And what's the nature of that award?
Yes, we have received the International Festival and Events Award for the past 4 years, just highlighting the city as an international event city encouraging more people to bring their events here. I know sometimes that is a challenge for constituents in certain districts that have a larger number of events, but as a Philadelphian, I would much rather live in a city that people want to come visit.
So you're familiar with the Concourse West and Concourse East roads out in Parkside, right near the Please Touch Museum, down to the abstinence fountain?
Yes, sir.
Any event you don't want down on the Parkway, you can send it right there, okay?
We encourage plenty of events to check out at the 4th District.
The 4th has open arms.
Absolutely.
All right, you have a nice day.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. There would be some people in my home area that would be willing to let that go. Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to that last question I had asked. I just want to make sure I'm clear that in the code, it says the Information Technology Strategic Plan Procedure has been a law since 2013, but we haven't prepared it.
Again, Councilman, I am not aware, but that would likely flow through the Chief Administrative Officer at this point.
Because let me just tell you the benefits of it. It says when you prepare the plan, the code dictates that it should include an assessment of how the city is working to improve management of telecommunications, establish IT performance, minimize overlap redundancy, reduce cost of city government through the use of IT, improve the delivery of services through the use of IT, reduce the amount of paper the city uses, promote the availability of all public records on the internet, and a few other things. So I think it's important, so maybe you can get back to us on that.
Yes, sir, we will.
Okay. Program-based budgeting is meant to determine the component costs of each function of city government. The code states that program-based budgeting shall determine metrics for measuring the effectiveness of each function funded by appropriations made by the city. Performance measures are meant to help departments evaluate their progress towards their strategic goals with the aim of improving the efficiency of the city's budgeting process year to year. With this in mind, what are we learning from the program measures for the administration policy program?
Councilman Chris Roop, Chief of Staff. The Administration Policy Program is a difficult program in the Managing Director's Office to put metrics around. That's sort of the catch-all part of our budget where the executives that live on our floor are funded from. One of the most significant transactional activities is contract management because we do provide administrative support not only for the Managing Director's Office but for several smaller units that don't have their own teams. The reason why we chose contract conformance is because this is an area that the city has historically struggled with doing in a timely manner, and it's something that we want to focus on streamlining. It is a goal and a metric that was set forth to try to challenge us to make sure we're constantly doing better with moving forward on those contracts. Because as you pointed out in your prior round of questioning, we have a lot of contract dollars that sit on our budget. So it's very important that we have that conformance period be as short and as reasonable and as efficient as possible. I will say that we, in the Managing Director's Office, whenever we adopted program-based budgeting in fiscal 2018, it was a challenge to come up with good metrics that really usefully quantify and measure what some of our internal functions do. Some were much easier, CLIP and 311, for example, because they're providing direct service. For some of our other aspects, due to just the unique nature of our office, a lot of that outward-facing service delivery really happens in the individual operating departments rather than in our office.
Let me ask another question on that. How does measuring the percentage of contracts confirmed within 90 days of their start date help you evaluate your progress towards your stated goal of addressing the city's persistent deep poverty or addressing, for example, the opioid epidemic?
So I would say with that specific metric, one of the big challenges we have as a city is it's really difficult for small businesses and vendors to do business with the city. It takes a very long time for contracts to get conformed, and we cannot pay people until those contracts are conformed. By trying to streamline the process and make sure that our contracted vendors have contracts in place in a timely manner, that reduces some of those barriers and makes it easier for small and emerging businesses to do business with the city. And it's an overall goal that the entire government has, is trying to make sure that we can get that conformance process, as quick as possible so people can get paid and so people can do business here without it putting them out of business.
I mean, I guess I guess the goal, the joint goal is to have all the contracts confirmed before their start date.
That would be a great goal to have, yes.
Okay. The Office of Workforce Development lists 4 performance metrics for fiscal year 20. Can you provide the unit cost for each performance measure in the workforce development program? I'll give you an example. How much does it cost the Office of Workforce Development to transition one individual from temporary or seasonal work to permanent employment?
We can try to provide that information. I will say that we don't have a huge amount of historical data because the Office of Workforce Development was only formed this fiscal year, but we can try to pull that together.